inconvenient for those sitting behind you. We're waiting for the president who's going to be with us with a moment. Thank you. Good afternoon, colleagues, friends. We begin our traditional meeting in the run-up to New Year. Let's call it a press conference. And as is tradition in such cases, I'd like to take several moments to talk a little bit about the outcomes of the year that is drawing nigh to the end. But I have the latest statistics, even though a lot has already been said about that. The statistics come from yesterday or from today. Over the 10 months of this year, the GDP has grown by 1.7%. According to the forecast of the ministry, it's going to be 1.8 at the end of the year. The industrial output has been growing at a higher pace, while last year the growth stood at 2.1%. In January to October this year, it stood at 2.9%, and by the end of the year, we forecast that it's going to stand at 3%. The manufacturing industries are growing at a slightly higher pace at 3.2%. Over the 3 quarters, the investment in the fixed capital has stood at 4.1%. The freight is growing, as well as retail, at 2.6%. The consumer demand is also quite significant, and this is a positive factor. After a long break, we are registering a slight and yet positive trend towards the growth of real income. The growth is going to be around 0.5%. I do hope that this trend is going to persist because the real wages are growing. Over the first months this year, it was 7.4%. It's going to be around 7% by the end of the year. We are also seeing an inflation rate that is quite acceptable to us, even though it slightly picked up around 0.5%. So we're going to step beyond the target set forth by the central bank of 4%. It's going to be 4.1%, a little more than 4%. The unemployment is decreasing, which is encouraging. Last year it was at a historic low, standing at 5.2%. This year it's going to be even lower, 4.8%. We are seeing the growth of our trade surplus. Back in 2017, it was around $115 billion. Over the 3 quarters this year, it is 157, and we're going to see 190 by the end of the year. $190 billion. Our financial fundamentals are strengthening, as well as our reserves by 7% more than that. Right now, it's 464, even though at the beginning it was 432. For the first time since 2011, we see a surplus of the budget and the surplus budget is going to be at around 2.1% of the GDP. Our National Welfare Fund is also growing by around 22%. The average insurance pension for the elderly stood at 13,677 rubles at the beginning of the year. By the end of this year, it's going to be 14,163, and our life expectancy has picked up slightly. It used to be around 70, and right now it's going to be 72.9 years. This is what I wanted to outline at the outset, but let's not waste our time. Let's dig straight into your questions and into my attempts at answering them. Thank you, colleagues. Let's begin. We give some priority to the Kremlin journalists who have been working during this year, during all the trips. Well, yes, we should always care about those who are most close to us. Itatas, let's begin with you. Give the mic to our TASS journalist, Veronika Romanenko, TASS agency. It probably can be said that 2018 passed by under the slogan of new national projects set forth by your May decrees that are going to take immense sums of money, as is the plan. But some experts, and this is something mentioned previously in Yalta, fear that it is impractical or impossible to implement these national projects. How well have the criteria been thought through? The head of the accounts chamber says that it is impossible to assess the efficiency of such projects. Do you have any objections to that, to this criticism? You compel me to say several words about the very expediency of what you have mentioned. Some question whether we need these national projects at all. But I'd like to say something I have already said. We need a breakthrough. We have to leap into a new technological order. Without that, the country has no future. And this is a question of principal importance. And we have to understand that. How can we achieve that? We've got to concentrate the resources we've got. We have to find them and pull them together and throw them behind the priority avenues of development. But how can we do that? Just find money and give them to someone? No, we've got to formulate the tasks to find the resources, something we were doing during 2017. The administration, the government were working on that so laboriously. Right now, people say that there are not many changes in the government, but these are mostly people who had been working on the development program for the country until 2024. They got to be responsible for what they planned.
So how shall we organize our efforts? Just give away money, 2.8 trillion rubles, which is the budget of the national projects, and 6.5 trillions more for infrastructure in a separate bank. All these investments should be focused on some breakthrough things with relevant blueprints at hand. We call that national projects. These are clear objectives. Without these clear objectives, no matter how we pack and arrange everything, we could not reach tangible results. So we have come up with 12 national projects and an infrastructure development plan. I'll recall the main areas of that plan: healthcare, education and science, which is human capital. Without this, no breakthrough is possible, nothing will happen. Second is output and economy. All the economic things are in that blueprint. And second thing includes digital economy and the robo-techniques and infrastructure as well, which I have already mentioned. Why we got together in Yalta, in the Crimea, and discussed should be motivated enough, not just to raise the prices because they have a lot of money, but to reach tangible results for the people, which is first thing. And second, we should understand whether they are up to the task. Some people say it is impossible to implement all that, to deliver. But you know what? We should deliver. We should make good. We should execute. If one feels that he or she cannot do that, please free their places for someone else who would be up to the mark. Some people who are side observers say it is impossible, but real people who work, real officials, don't say so. And I hope for consolidated good work, both on the federal and the regional levels. There should be some adjustments about the parameters, and we have received some bottom-up proposals, and I hope that the government they say that in the forthcoming years the GDP growth would be below 2%. So what does the government build upon in those forecasts and in planning future activities? And is it possible to reach this breakthrough with these inputs, or will the economy just leave off the oil revenues, putting it aside and spending when need be? And are you happy with the Medvedev team, by and large? Dear friends, please respect each other. Just ask one question per person, no more. Just look. The economic growth rate at 1% for a certain period of time. Well, Mr. Kudrin was the deputy prime minister at that time, by the by. So, you shouldn't blame others if you may be found guilty yourself. So we cannot make the mechanical calculations. I respect Mr. Kudrin. He is a very good professional and my comrade. Disbanded, but what we want is to have it back. Please think it over. When was it disbanded? In 1998. It was the hold of the red flag order. So 20 years passed, I'm not sure what is left from this legendary school in 20 years' time, but the Defense Ministry of the Russian Federation trains personnel depending on the needs of the armed forces, so we should see what can be done about that, about this high military school of Kacha, not to waste the leftovers of the tradition there. I'll ask the Defense Ministry's advice. Okay, here we can see in the first row a girl in black. black, dressed in black, without any placard, any writing, any sign. Mr. President, he has caught everybody's eye. Prime Agency, Maria Bogalyuk. Mr. President, this year's and next year's budget will see a surplus. Nevertheless, since the 1st of January, a number of steps will be enacted that will result in the price hike for a number of goods and services, like the VAT growth that will provoke the utilities tariffs and self-employed tax in pilot regions to be introduced. Does it chime well with economic policy? So you said the public utility bills and what, and you know, the self-employed tax in pilot regions that will be introduced. Don't you think it's going to be too high a burden for the Russian economy and the common people? You mentioned this surplus, which is a very good indicator of whether the government has been effective, the economic block thereof. For the first time, as I have said in my introductory remarks, we are seeing the 2.1% surplus of our federal budget, the first time since 2014. But we should not be forgetful that being an oil producer, an exporter, that accounts for the bulk of the fiscal revenues, we also have the non-oil and gas deficit in our budget, which is what we receive after the sales of oil and gas. And I will remind you that back in 2009, that stood at around 13%, which was a lot. At the turn of the century, it was around 3%, but as a result of an economic downturn, global economic downturn, later on we had to spend petrodollars in order to make good of our welfare measures and promises to our people. We spent the petrodollars, and our non-oil and gas deficit rose to a double-digit value of 13%. Now we have brought it down to 6.6%, and next year we hope it to be at 6% and keep being flat for some years on, which testifies of the sustainability of our economy. So in order to see this parameter flat, we have to raise the VAT. This is first thing. Second, in many countries, VAT is at 20 or even higher percentage points, and we had it higher as well, but we reduced it. But the effective VAT rate for the whole of the economy in general would be lower, because we have maintained the bulk of the benefits, the children's items and medicines production. IT companies also will keep enjoying some tax benefits. So we preserve those, and the effective rate would be lower. And I really hope it's going to be a one-off thing. And we may see a slight upswing in prices at the start of the year, and later on it's going to be waning. And the central bank has been introducing steps to prevent the growth of inflation. The policy rate was raised by 0.25 percentage points in order to avoid a price hike in future and high inflation. On the whole, I think it is a well-conceived decision, providing additional fiscal revenue, and we will be able to deliver upon our pledges and development plans, I mean the national projects. With respect to the utility bills, in the past year, they grew by 4% on average, and next year we will see two phases of the increment 1.7, and the second stage will see a 2.4% increase, 4.1 in total. Why have we split it into stages? Because of the VAT growth we probably may see the growth of prices of goods and services needed for the public utility operation.
So, in order to safeguard the interests of our citizens, we've made a decision to accomplish this process in 2 stages, but the overall growth should not be higher than 4.1%. And the government decides if it is indeed very much needed in the region, and the current situation requires a higher rate, then it would be an exception, but that needs to be discussed with the government of the Russian Federation. Yes, yes. First channel, please. That's very interesting. You said that you will tell us where the revenues are, where the profits are, so do tell. Good morning, Mr. President. My name is Ekaterina Gagarina. I represent the Russia channel in Novosibirsk. The importance of the project of the Academ City 2.0 is very important. This is a truly unique project for the entire country, but the technological component also includes a number of very important tasks. For example, to build residences and build roads and kindergartens for those who are going to work there. So will those ambitions be implemented? I do understand that this is a very important component of the entire process, and together with the head of the region, we are going to work on that. When I was in Novosibirsk, we discussed it with my colleagues, but the first task of the federal power is to adhere to its commitments when it comes to the development of this scientific city, the academic city, because they earn money using those high-tech innovations. If additional measures would be required to resolve the social component, then we'll undertake additional measures. The mortgage rate is growing, and this is great, and we are going to support that. More than 20% we have observed this growth in mortgage credits, and if there's this dire need to help by the federal powers, then we can discuss that. Please give the microphone. Mr. President. Good afternoon, Sergei Marov, Zvezda newspaper. Going from particulars to the general. Next to our office, there's a plant who's been undertaking titanic efforts in order to create the manufacturing process for producing clothes. It's understandable what they want to do. And I've been undertaking consultations with those who work on this flax factory, and the research institutes who works on flax is now being eliminated altogether. This is the last institution, the higher education institutions, which prepares and trains staff for this industry. So there's a difference between what the state wants and what the institution wants. So, Mr. President, how do you assess the current state of manufacturing and its growth rate? And do you believe that you're providing enough support to local producers? I'm not sure, because I'm not aware of the troubles faced by the flax producers, but this is the traditional manufacturing industry for our country. We've always been proud of that industry. I'm going to look into that, but as is usually the case, the problem is usually more complex when we might guess at first sight. But again, I would like to highlight that it has always been our pride, and if flax production is crucial for our country, we need to keep that, and I'm going to look into that. As for industrial growth, I've already said that it's generally higher than the GDP growth. It's 3%, and manufacturing 3.2% growth. Those are some good numbers. As for light industry, it's been developing even more rapidly. Food production has grown over 10 months for 13%, which is also testimony to the fact that consumer rate is growing. As for clothes and shoes, we observe a growth of 9%, and this is indeed a very good number. Now, as for support, whether we are providing enough support, of course we are not providing enough. That is why we have set out a number of programs aimed at supporting various types of industries. And up to 2024, the overall volume of support will be 1,376 billion rubles. It's going to go to light industry, aviation, and other types of industries. And in main areas, we have separate programs in place, and for the next year, we are going to allocate 450 billion rubles for these purposes. Then a year later, 470 billion rubles. The overall volume is 1,376 billion rubles. I'm sorry, but I promised to Anton Vernitsky from the first channel that he would have an opportunity to ask the question. In our Soviet childhood, Mr. President, we were all afraid of the nuclear war. We even had the songs about that. So you're not afraid now. So some 40 years have passed since then, and now major publications across the pond are now publishing the scenarios, the possible scenarios of nuclear exchanges between the US and Russia. And now we hear the word war more and more often. Can you, as a president, help to pacify my little son who, just like me, is afraid of the nuclear war? What can you do to do that? You know, I think that you're actually right. The danger of the situation escalating is being downplayed. It now seems to be impossible, something not of crucial importance. But at the same time, if something like this would happen, this might lead to the collapse of the entire civilization, maybe our planet. So this is indeed a very important question. And unfortunately, we have this trend to underestimate the current situation. There are dangers, there are risks in our day-to-day life. And what are those risks? First and foremost, the collapse of the international system of arms control, of moving away from an arms race. After the United States withdrew from the relevant treaty, this treaty that was the cornerstone when it comes to non-proliferation and putting an end to an arms race, we had to respond with creating a new type of weapon to overcome these anti-missile defense systems. And now we hear that Russia has an advantage when it comes to weaponry systems. Of course, other countries in the world do not possess such systems, but they are going to develop such systems, and this does provide us with a certain advantage. But this is about having equal conditions, having the parity when it comes to our weapon arsenals. Now they're making another step, and they are withdrawing from the INF treaty, so what's going to come out of that? It's hard to imagine what is going to happen next. If those missiles would be positioned in Europe, what are we going to do? We will need to ensure that we are safe. And then they would be complaining that we have an advantage. We are not striving to have an advantage. We are striving to keep a proper balance, ensure our security. The same goes for the New START treaty. It expires in 2021. We do not have any negotiations in place as of yet, so you're not interested in that, you don't want to keep that. That's okay. We can ensure our safety, we know how to do that. But for humanity in general, this is a bad thing, because it leads us to a very risky verge. there's a trend to lower this threshold of actually using those weapons. They want to make small-scale nuclear weapons in order to use them tactically. Some analysts are already expressing such ideas that maybe perhaps it's not such a bad thing and we can use it, but lowering the threshold might lead to a global nuclear catastrophe. And secondly, the use of ballistic missiles, non-nuclear ballistic missiles. Although our American partners seems to have decided against it, but the idea is there. And the ballistic missile has been launched, nuclear or non-nuclear, or in the prevention systems, they record the place of launch, and in several seconds they define the trajectory and the possible target. But there's always this error margin, and we should not let the escalation happen. In any case, there is this idea to use those ballistic non-nuclear missiles. For example, a submarine would launch such a missile, and we do not know whether it's nuclear or non-nuclear. It's very hard to tell. So this is very, very dangerous, and this is being hyped up and discussed, and this is what is dangerous. But I believe that the humanity would have the necessary common sense and the desire to survive in order not to lead to any extremities. Now we're moving on to this sector. I see the Ukrainian flag, second row. So it's you who is always present at these events. And you're from Ukraine. This is our colleague from Ukraine. And my colleague said that we should not let him ask a question because he's going to make a row. Are you going to make a row? Yes, please. Igor Sazaev, Izvestia. I want to ask about the Kerch incident. But you're not from Ukraine, but my question is about Ukraine. About the Kerch incident, I want to ask about the fate of the Ukrainian military men. What's going to happen to them? And was this provocation successful? How do you think? And what about the detainees and prisoners, Russian prisoners in the US, like Putin and Yushchenko? Can Russia defend their rights? And maybe we should use the experience of our Chinese partners. For example, in Canada, a Chinese citizen, the financial director of Huawei was detained, and they detained their citizens in response. I would actually divide your question into several parts. Do you believe that the provocation was successful? So now we can state that this was a provocation, and you agree to that. Whether it was successful or not, I believe that provocations are never successful, so to say. A provocation seeks to escalate the situation. And why do our Ukrainian partners need this? Well, they have elections and they need to escalate the situation in order to boost the ratings of one of the presidential candidates. I mean the current president of the Ukraine, of course. But this is no good, because it harms the interests of the people and harms the interests of the state. And we can work in a calm manner without any provocations. As to whether it was successful, maybe when it comes to boosting ratings it was, because his rating, Petro Poroshenko's rating, didn't grow. He used to be ranked 5 and now he's second or third. There's this margin of 12%. And Yulia Tymoshenko has more than 20%, while Zelensky and the rest of them, Boyko and Poroshenko, have some 12% rating. So I guess that he did accomplish something, but he did sacrifice the interests of his country. So this is a bad way to boost your rating. As for the future and the fate of the Ukrainian military men, they were sent to die, actually. And I see that the ruling circles are not satisfied with the fact that no one died, because they wanted some of them to die, but fortunately that was not the case. The investigation is ongoing, and after that we will determine what to do. And now please give the floor to our colleague from Ukraine.
Thank you. No scandal like in the past. Vladimir Vladimirovich, how much do you spend to support occupied Donbass? Because they are living, they are poor and they are slaves of Russia, to call the spade the spade. You are afraid of nuclear catastrophe, nuclear war, but at the same time, not only war, we are getting ready to the war with NATO, and you are shooting at Ukrainian citizens. You actually ordered to shoot at our sailors. So what are the conditions of changing them? And now about elections. Conditions of exchanging them, Ukrainian political prisoners and Ukrainian POWs. You need Russian citizens or not? And now about elections. You are analyzing, you keep analyzing ratings. No, I'm not analyzing, I'm just looking at them. You are intervening into the election process like you've done in case of United States in the past. Don't you think that it could happen that there will be no direct dialogue between Ukrainian and Russian presidents until you change your job? Well, okay, as to the people suffering, people living in Donbass, you are Ukrainian citizen. And you believe that these people are your citizens, Ukrainian citizens, those who live in this territory, on this territory. Who actually imposed blockade, blocked Donbass from other Ukrainian territory, not Russia, but Ukrainian government. They've imposed 100% economic blockade of against the territory which they consider their own, and they are shooting at the citizens, which they believe that they are Ukrainian citizens. Every day, peaceful men and women are dying, and we are supporting them, we are helping them, people living in Donbass, only to help them to survive, not to avoid the situation when they could be killed and annihilated. And we will keep doing this, because trying to solve political issues using force, and we keep noticing this for many years already, and Ukrainian government keeps doing this, so they won't be successful. This should be understood. Now, how we should settle our relations? Who will stay at the power? Who will stay at the position of power or not? It's not the main thing. The main thing is our attitude towards people, and we would like to see Donbass peaceful and rich territory, because Ukraine is still our one of the main trade partner. Our trade turnover is growing in spite of all efforts of Ukrainian government. I'm talking about last year and this year. Well, it's not strange. It's not strange, because we have just natural relations, natural links and ties, and they are demonstrating its efficiency. But until in Kiev, we have those who hate Russia, who do not understand their own interests. This abnormal situation will still be there, independently who is holding the position of power in Kremlin. And now exchange of prisoners. We are Mr. Medvedchuk, representing Poroshenko, is doing this, is dealing with this, and recently he came to Moscow and he talked about the need to let the Ukrainian POWs free, those whom we detained in the Black Sea. And Medvedchuk also touched upon this, but as I've mentioned already, it will be possible to solve these issues after the criminal case is over. Now, let's sport accessible for kids. Good afternoon, dear colleagues, Mr. President. Good afternoon, Margarita Baulina, Society, Community Traditions publication. We took part in the social project. We started to develop the project dealing with a football field for kids from orphanages and for families with problems. But actually, we are facing indifference. They view us as just a refueling station, or what are you trying to do? I don't understand. We are trying to build a covered soccer field for kids from orphanages and from families with problems, for them to be able to demonstrate their abilities. You are NGO? Or what? We are organization which and the basis is our publication. So you are commercial organization? Yes, because we don't see the way how we could implement this project. Whom are trying to deal with to solve these issues? With several committees of our town, starting from property committee, health, youth policy and sport committee. They just keep kicking us out. What is the budget of your project? 11 million. Where are you from? St. Petersburg. Well, I'll talk to the governor, and I'm sure that we will solve this problem. Federal information agencies. We didn't give them the floor. Interfax, Ksusha, Ksenia Interfax. I'd like to congratulate you with the day of counterintelligence officers. No microphone, I'm sorry. Well, our intelligence and counterintelligence and in the information special agent, well, in the information profession is the same. We're dealing with information, you are dealing with information, and special services are dealing with information. So I'm from the information agency Interfax, Ksenia Golovanova. Recently, our society, and mainly our youth, is facing rather strange activities of our government, which provoke rather tense situation. You know about well, you are doubting my abilities. Well, I know this word. I knew this word before. I had rappers among our trustees. With tattoos, but the person whom I'm talking about is a great person and great artist. At the council dedicated to the culture, you said that if you cannot oppose a movement, you should be the leader. You should become a leader of this movement. Why our state is trying to intervene into the situation? Well, they are singing their songs, probably using four-letter words, but nothing bad about this. And another problem related to our youth. Now everybody is preoccupied with the legislative initiative, which has to do with the following. If you say something bad about our state, about our government, then you will be held responsible, and this responsibility will even more tough. Will be even tougher. Don't you afraid to lose youth? As to the possibility to lose or actually acquire authority among young people. When they tell me about young people, I it reminds me of our heroic and tragic pages of our history. Let's remember the company of our paratroopers, of our airborne company. Well, 99 persons after secondary school, 99 persons after against 2000. So 6 persons survived after 3 days of combat, hand-to-hand combat. They used knives and spades to hold their position. 19-year-old, 20-year-old boys, they are heroes. And what about volunteers? We have thousands and thousands of them. During our soccer World Cup, 35,000 volunteers worked there, and people who are looking for remnants of the World War II, well, thousands of them. All of them are young persons. And this society, this part of the society is has a huge roots, and they are young people. They are the basis for today and for the future of our country. We have young scientists, we have talented musicians and artists among them, rappers as well. As to the holding responsible persons who actually talk bad about our banner, about our country, in each and every country they have this, and we shall respect our country. There are rules which should be respected. If we have responsibility outside internet, we should have the same responsibility inside the net. What is the difference? Internet is part and parcel of our day-to-day life. It's in all aspects of our life. Thus, rappers have been detained. Well, I agree with this. No need to do this. We have just the opposite results. Nothing good here. But at the same time, nothing good in their songs we're using four-letter words. Let them do this. Well, recently I've assisted in the anniversary of Timur Kanov, 80 years old. He said just a normal thing, nothing special, he said, but he said the right thing. Art exists not to support low motives or interests or a low profile of our culture. The culture exists to upgrade this level. That's why, well, one shall not be punished because of that. It's not correct, it's not right. But there are other things. It was broadcasted directly, and I talked to my interlocutor at the meeting of the Council of the Culture. Let's just argue violently. Well, actually, this idea didn't cross our minds. We shall not support this, no. But there are other things, like, for example, advertising drugs. Why do we need our youth to use drugs? Why shall we support this? Why it will lead to degradation of our people, of our nation, of our youth. We don't want this. Someone would like to use this propaganda of drugs. Let him or her do this. We don't want to do this, and we shall not be indifferent in front of this. We shall oppose it differently, these tendencies. It was fashionable to talk about suicide among young people. So, shall we hang ourselves, all of us? But I don't want to be the first. Let you be the first. You don't want this, eh? So we shall not be indifferent when it comes to our youth. But we shall be smart in doing this. We shall not just prohibit this. No, we shall use different methods here. Do we have these methods? Yes, we have methods and means. We shall be quite accurate, we shall be calm, and we shall convince we shall show the attractiveness of other values. Just to prohibit it once and for all, well, we shall not do this. I agree with you here. Besides Ukrainian press, we have other press, for example, from Japan, Kyoto Tsusin, just in the middle. Microphone, please. Good afternoon, Vladimir Vladimirovich. Hirama Samizaki, Japan Kyoto Tsusin. My question, unfortunately, has to do with our peace treaty, which we are aiming at, as far as I can see. After your meeting in Singapore, where with Mr. Abe you have agreed upon to speed up the negotiation process on the basis of the Soviet-Japanese Declaration of 1956, so we are preoccupied with the following thing. How many islands we will get back? 0, 1, 2, 3, 4? I don't know. On the other hand, Russia cannot understand why shall we give back our islands. Different people actually are telling us that you will get not a single centimeter of our land.
But this is about demarcation, a territorial demarcation, something we have to do. So, what about this peace treaty? What if it is only confined to the delineation of borders? Then that is going to be too little. So, what do you think? What new ideas should be given to all of this? What do we need in order to propel our relations to a new level of quality? And in that regard, if you'll allow me, I cannot but ask a question. Recently, the Russian side and you in particular have been raising the issue of security. I refer in particular to the deployment of the American ABM system in Japan, as well as the potential deployment of the American troops or the military infrastructure on the islands, should these islands be transferred to Japan. At the expert level, we have negotiations ongoing, but given the fact that it's the sphere of defense, Japan is almost entirely dependent on the US. Do you think these issues can be addressed at the bilateral level, or will you have to talk directly to the United States of America? Well, let me not forget what you ended your question with, and that is why I like to say that security issues are very important, especially when a peace treaty is concerned. You asked about the American military infrastructure in Japan. It already exists there. On Okinawa, there is a huge American military base. It has been there for several decades now. We know that. As for Japan's chance to participate in these decisions, this is sort of a black box for us. We do not understand how sovereign Japan is when such decisions are concerned. You understand better than the rest of us colleagues, and I know that too, that the governor of Okinawa is against some of the decisions on reinforcing the base, on expanding this military base. The governor is against that, but he can do nothing about that. And the people who live on Okinawa are also against that. And you don't have to go far to find that out, because that's what the polls tell us. That's what people say when they take to the streets. They demand that this military base should be withdrawn. Well, at least what they are against is the reinforcement of the air component of the American forces deployed there. There are plans reinforcing the base and developing it. Everyone is against that, and yet that is happening. What happens after a peace treaty is agreed upon, we do not know. But without having an answer to that question, it is going to be extremely difficult for us to take any radical decisions. And certainly what is of concern to us is the plans to deploy ABM systems in Japan. I said that on many occasions now, and I'd like to reiterate that we do not think that these are defensive arms. This is part of the American nuclear strategic potential that is transferred to the periphery, and these systems are synchronized and work comprehensively together with offensive systems. We have no illusions as to that, and we understand that full well, and yet we will seek sincerely a peace treaty with Japan. I'm confident, as well as Prime Minister Abe, that the current state of affairs between our two countries is not normal. Both Japan and Russia are interested in fully resolving the issues that remain in our relations, not just because we want something from Japan from the point of view of economics. Just today, an Economic Development Minister Reshkin reported on his trip to Japan. There is some progress. There has been an agreement on opening up some of the Japanese markets for Russian products like poultry. And there is also progress in other avenues, and there is going to be progress because that is what life compels us to do. But a peace treaty and the resolution of differences are what we need. This is a complicated issue, but we are willing to work with our colleagues to move forward. We've just had the news that Ofcom, a British regulator, has recognized that RT is responsible for violating the broadcasting rules. And I saw RT somewhere here. Maybe we'll give the chance to ask a question to them. Good day, thank you, Mr. Peskov. My name is Ilya Petrenko, Russia Today, but I've got a question unrelated to what Ofcom has decided. First, I'd like to ask you about the recent decision on facilitating the procedure for granting Russian citizenship to Ukrainians. Our channel has been covering this issue a lot, in particular covering the bureaucracy involved. But what's the rationale behind that? How important is that? And if it is just to help the Ukrainian citizens in the eastern part of the country, why do that now? And aren't you afraid that bureaucracy is still going to persist, the red tape, but it's only going to be different? And another question regarding what colleagues from Izvestia have said. There is the Skripal affair, the assassination of Khashoggi, a Saudi journalist, and the reactions are different to these two events. Maria Butina, Vyshinsky have been detained. There's been another reaction. There is also an arrest of the financial director of Huawei, and Trump has publicly said that she is just a pawn in the straight war with China. So questions have been raised whether we'll see a new practice emerge in Russia when foreign citizens are going to be detained under a far-fetched pretext in order to exchange them for someone. Let me start with the last part of your question. I would hate to comment on what is happening in the U.S.-China relations, who detains whom in response to what actions. That is a very delicate field, and in this field we're not going to act under the principles that were laid forth in Hammurabi's laws. It's called eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. That is the principle laid there. But we have to act very cautiously and in conformity with the realities. If there are people who violate Russian legislation regardless of their nationality, we're going to hold them accountable, but we're not going to detain any innocent people in order to exchange them from anyone. As for the fate of the future of our citizens, we're not indifferent to that. Well, as for this Putina and trying to make her confess something, I don't know what she can confess. She has not been acting under any guidance or any decree from the Russian authorities. Whatever she says, because of the threats, because of the intimidation, and this pressure on her, the prospect of sitting for 12 years in a prison. I do not know why she has been put in prison. There are no foundations for that, but everyone wants to emerge from that with their reputation intact. I mean the American justice systems. But of course, we're not indifferent to her future. We're going to monitor it and support her as far as we can. As for the Skripal affair, there's nothing for me to comment Clementine and Khashoggi. Khashoggi has been assassinating, that is evident, everyone has recognized that. As for Skripal, well, that's another matter entirely. So one thing has led to a stop of sanctions and the other to complete silence. That is this politicized Russophobic approach. That is yet another pretext in order to mount yet another attack on Russia. If there had been no Skripal, then they would have come up with something else. There is only one goal I see behind it, and that is to constrain Russia, to prevent it from developing, because we are seen as a rival. Now, moving on to the next part of your question, the bureaucracy, the red tape involved in acquiring citizenship. Well, bureaucracy is eternal. One cannot overcome it, nor can one live without it. But some rules have to be set forth, certain procedures for decision-making. As for granting the Russian citizenship, this just doesn't have to do with what is happening in the east of Ukraine. We're not just doing it for those people who live in those territories. If we do that, if we facilitate this procedure, now the government is preparing the amendments to the law on citizenship and the acquisition of citizenship. I'll tell you why it is being done. It is being done in order to demonstrate to everyone that we do not seek, nor are we going to support policies aimed at splitting, at separating the Russian people from the Ukrainian people. What are the current Ukrainian authorities doing? What are they trying to achieve using this Russophobia they fuel? And they say that almost publicly. They're trying to tear these two peoples apart, the Russian people and the Ukrainian people. That is what they seek to do, and that is why everything is forgiven to them. Your colleague from the Ukrainian media has mentioned the tribulations the people of Donbass and the Luhansk region are going through. The level of life is very low there, but what about the rest of Ukraine? The standard of life there is almost as low as in the Donbass. It is getting worse amid the hostilities, amid the tensions. Everything is forgiven to the authorities within the country, and without more so because they get money for that. They're going to get yet another tranche from the IMF, yet another bulk of money, but this is only going to be enough to pay the pensions and other social benefits, and the future generations will have to pay for this loan. But on the whole, the situation there is not that good in the economic sphere, in the social sphere, in internal politics. And yet our two peoples are very close. We have historical roots going deep, and we're going to do everything in order to support this closeness, this proximity. Right now, amendments are being prepared to the citizenship law, and these amendments are going to be passed early next year. Maybe regional media. I see the Khakassia newspaper, a very small placard. Could you speak a little bit louder, please? Mr. President, I'm from Khakassia newspaper. I would like to raise the issue of the recent regional elections. It's no secret that in several regions the elections have been very emotional, very tense. Sometimes it has taken a lot to complete the elections in Primoria. They have only over now. Khakassia took 2 months to vote, but after this protest vote, opposition parties arrived in power. And Khakassia, we've got a candidate from the Communist Party in Karabarovsk and Vladimir regions, from the Liberal Democratic Party. And that begs the question, why do you think this has happened? And secondly, why, despite the tradition that you previously held, you have not yet met with the new leaders? And how to build relations with the regions where opposition parties have arrived in power. There is a fear that the federal center is going to deprive these regions of financing and so on and so forth. Please do not worry about that. It's very strange that this question arises at all. As for the meeting, the elections in Vladivostok have just been completed, and that is why the meetings have not yet happened. I think they are already scheduled. Next week we are going to have the session of the State Council, and I have given the instruction to the administration there's going to be a separate meeting with the newly elected heads of regions. The territories that you have mentioned in particular, we had to wait for the outcome of the election in Vladivostok. That's the first thing. Secondly, this is not the first time when we see opposition party candidates arrive in power during the vote. You know that the Liberal Democratic Party candidate is the head of Smolensk region, and I think in Omsk there is an opposition party. In other regions there are communists in power, and they are working very well.
I'm not a member of any party. I was one of the founders of the United Russia Party, but the president should not be a party member in this country. What matters most for me is that the people in the Rimland should feel that their life is changing for the better, and once they decide to support this or that person who is not representing the United Russia Party, it's up to them to decide. And I will help and avail any of the elected heads of regions. But the point is that this person elected should be up to the task and be able to deliver on his electoral pledges to people. Okay, let's continue. RIA Novosti is the one from the pool yet to ask a question. Lina Glushakova, RIA Novosti Newswire, good day. I have a poster representing Masha and the bear, and as my colleagues have said, for a number of years we have been under a great deal of sanctions, and we get confused, and sometimes even the cartoon protagonists are subject to sanctions. But they want to impose even stricter sanctions, like the American lawmakers are getting ready for that. Does Russia brace itself for the new round of sanctions, and does the government has a plan to minimize the after effects for the economy, and what may these after effects be? Well, we mentioned these sanctions on many occasions. If you want me to repeat that, okay. In the course of our history, the Russian Federation, Russia has lived under restrictions and sanctions throughout all our history. Let's go look back to the 19th century, in the 12th century. It's all the same. Just lead through the diplomatic correspondence of the late 19th and early 20th centuries. It's all the same. Our diplomats were called to bring Caucasus to order and do this and that. Why so? With what is it linked? I said that before, and I hope you understand, most of you understand. It is because the power of the Russian Federation has been rising, the competitiveness is on the rise. There is a new powerful stakeholder to be reckoned with, and many parties don't want that. And it seemed a while ago that this country was moving to an existence. But, you know, we have the population of 160 million people, and we have been upholding the interests of our people with reserve and restraint, with calm and peace, and we will keep doing that. And the Skripal case was cited, and Khashoggi once again, and it has no sense, just additional measures to contain the Russian Federation. Our economy has been adjusting itself to these new restrictions. I mentioned at the outset of today's press conference that after the 2008 global downturn, our GDP fell by 7.8 percentage points. without any sanctions. And while after the sanctions were imposed in 2014, the GDP slump was 2.5% only. You asked me how we assess the after effects. Well, our assessment, definitely from our own perspective, it is one thing, but let's look at how the opponents of ours assess the sanctions, like the Treasury Department of the US believes that this 2.5% fall in 2015 is related only by one-third to sanctions, and the two-thirds is because of this fall is because of the slump in the hydrocarbons price. I think that the share of sanctions is less than one-third. And it backfires on those who impose these sanctions, like the European economy lost around 500 billion euro as a result of these sanctions imposed. They have not been able to supply as many goods and items as before, and they have not been able to import as many things as before, and the number of jobs has waned, which is quite sensitive for them. In many European countries, the unemployment rates are high, like in Spain, it's at around 15%. And here we have, in this country, at 4.8, in Spain they have a 15% unemployment, and the global trade development that went down by $14-something billion. It's also an after effect of the unpredictable sanctions policies, and it's detrimental to everybody. Our economy has been adapting to that. It has adjusted itself to sanctions, despite some negative repercussions, but there are definitely some of the positive things, like we have started thinking and using our own mind and using our own resources. The share of our own domestic vehicle manufacturing industry is 97% or 75% for some of the groups of vehicles and other technical devices. Last year and this year we spent 600 million rubles on import substitution, and the federal budget shares 125 billion rubles. The agricultural sector has benefited. Unfortunately, there was a short-term price hike for food items inside this country, but now the prices have stabilized and the agriculture has leaped forward a lot. And no one could think of that in the past. And the agricultural exports have increased 16 times in the past years, so there are some drawbacks and some advantages at the same time, and we would like the global economy to develop without any shocks or illegitimate action or external constraints for the benefit of the global economy. Okay, this time, this flank, regional media, Chelyabinsk. Okay, but you know, I see the sign KGB and children. Today is the 20th of December, which is the KGB, used to be the KGB day. Why this sign, KGB and children? Please pass the mic over there. As a good acquaintance of mine said, all of us are KGB children, but we were brought up in different manner, all of us. How KGB brought you up? Probably life brought you up. KGB stopped educating us anyway. Now there is a demand in our society to see more social justice, and 66%, according to polls, are nostalgic about the USSR. So my question is whether it is possible to restore socialism in this country, to come back to socialism. I think it is hardly possible. I believe that we have seen an overhaul in our society. In-depth going changes have happened, and it is impossible to restore socialism. There may be some elements of socialism in the welfare, in our economy, but anyway, you know what? It always always results in spending outriding the revenues, the budget revenues, and we end up in a gridlock at the end of the day. But, you know, the tenets of the fair distribution of resources and the fair treatment of all those below poverty line and structuring the government's policies around trying to reduce to a minimum the number of people below the poverty line, as well as being able to provide the bulk of the people with decent health care and education that will be affordable and accessible to them. If we mean socialism in this sense, this is what we have been doing, getting to grips with that, and this is why our national projects have been enacted. They're aimed at that. Okay, if it's not about KGB, then let's give the floor to Chelyabinsk. Thank you. My name is Yana Skonechna. I represent South Urals and the city of Chelyabinsk. My question is not about our city of Chelyabinsk, it's about all of the country. It's about litter segregation and treatment. Now, not a single city has a well-established, well-ingrained culture of litter segregation and treatment and processing. A colleague of mine is a fiend of litter segregation, but all of her flat is full of containers, but she should take those containers by car to the opposite end of the city to submit to a plant. You know, some of the infrastructure installations have been appearing, but you know, it's just pittance. It's a very small number of these. Why not use the international best practices to process and treat our litter and waste? You know, the situation is difficult, but the answer is simple. We've never done that before. For decades, since the Soviet times, it was dumped to landfills and pits, and no one did any processing, any treatment at all. Just some pinpointed steps were taken. We know we have 70 or 80 million tons of waste per annum, and we should somehow recycle and treat that. And with the rapid development of consumer industry and other industries, we have seen more litter, more chemicals, more plastics. In the Pacific Ocean, they have islands the size of France with full of litter, full of plastic containers and bottles. And in this country, it's just dumped to landfills inside the Russian Federation. We should liquidate the illegal landfills, which is measure number one, and number two is to build a brand new recycling and treatment industry. Your colleague is a good example to cite, but you know, we should have more such people in the regions, and municipalities should provide a good context and incentives for litter segregation and processing. I can understand those people who are against building plants. But anyway, you mentioned the international best practices. What we need are the very best practices. And the environmental champions and activists sometimes don't object even to building litter incineration plants. But you know, they should have the proper filter systems, which is the most expensive part of these plants. Anyway, we need the proper methodology. In Tokyo, probably your colleague would confirm that, in the downtown they have the litter incineration plants built. No smell, nothing reeks, because the technology has been maintained. Till 2024 we are to build 200 litter processing plants. at least 200 per country. I'm not sure whether it's enough. Mr. President, probably the Chinese colleagues should be given a chance. Xinhua News Wire, and we'll give the floor to you as well. Afternoon, Mr. President. I'm from Xinhua News Wire. The question is as follows. In China, we had an inaugural meeting, a solemn meeting, dedicated to the 40th anniversary of the openness reform, and President Xi called for going through to the end with all the measures about openness and democracy. And how do you assess the changes of the Chinese society? And Russia and China have set out a figure of 100 billion of mutual trade. Russian exports to China increased by 44%, outpacing Chinese imports by $10 billion. Are you happy with the development of Russian-Chinese ties this year?
Indeed, that is an important milestone. Not sure if we'll be able to reach $100 billion, but we are very close to that mark. And we'll need to count the overall volume at the start of the next year, but in general, yes, it is around $100 billion, and that is an achievement in itself. Of course, we cannot stop at that. But this is a result of the Russian-Chinese relationships, because we observe that we have greater trust between us, we work in a bilateral format, and we have sound relationships between ourselves. We have resolved all the issues we have inherited from the USSR times, and now we are moving forward. We are collaborating not only when it comes to economy, but also when it comes to international agenda. And the Russian-Chinese cooperation on the international arena is a factor which helps to revitalize the international situation, to make it stable and predictable. We positively assess the changes that we saw in China, and for such a country as China, with a population of 1,300,000,000 people, stability is crucial, especially when it comes to domestic policy, including the staff matters. And President Xi Jinping made the decision, and his party members supported him. And I guess that the decision was the correct one. Stability guarantees progressive development for China. And here we have some journalists from our regions. And Yakutia, please. Thank you very much. Alexander Ilyin, Yakutia newspaper. The Crimean Bridge is a symbol of the return of Crimea to Russia. And a bridge over the Lena River might become a symbol of the Asian part of the Russian territory. And now the question is as such, should we expect such bridge to be constructed? And if yes, then when? Because we really need it. A symbol is always something good, because it marks a certain stage in our work and allows us to move forward. That is why the Crimean Bridge is actually both. It is a symbol of the reunification of Russia and Crimea, and this also provides some additional opportunities for the development of the peninsula. This is also very important. The same is true for the bridge over Lena River. You said that it should be linked to development, and this is what we actually need to assess. The cost of the bridge, and as we've said for several years now, this is very expensive, and we need to understand whether the bridge is going to come straight to the city, or maybe we might develop the region in general on the other shore of the Lena River. to develop the economy, the infrastructure, find some possible fields, etc., etc. So we need to compare the expenses and the gains, the potential gains for the economy of the region in general. So if our colleague of the Ministry of Transport or the Ministry of Economy would negotiate it between themselves, then we'll implement the project. Yes, nature, yes, motherland, people, that's great. Let's do that. We'll move on to gas. We are not running out of gas. We have greatest gas reserves in the world. Only in Yamal we have 67 trillion of cubic meters of gas. Mr. President, thank you very much for this opportunity to ask a question. I'm the head editor of the Society and Ecology, and I've been publishing this for some 19 years in St. Petersburg, and next year we will mark 20 years since the establishment of our newspaper. It's a small publication, but a sustainable one. Yes, we'll celebrate that. I would like to invite you to St. Petersburg to take part in the round table dedicated to the strategy of development of Russia, which is timed to coincide with our 20th anniversary. And my question is, while protecting the rivers, the forests, the River Don, I would like to highlight that at the Russian Media Forum on the 23rd of April, you have tasked your people to talk you about this dangerous objects would be constructed or not. And at the Economic Forum, we've heard that the task is still going ahead, but the decision was actually made for you, and the local authorities do not want to act on your decision. So please pay attention to the Don River. It is a very great river, just like Neva is, for example. And recently we had a cultural council on the 15th of December at the Konstantinovsky Palace, and all the questions asked there were very important, for example, about drug addiction, but Andrei Mikhalkov-Konchalovsky asked one of the most crucial questions, and this is what I have on my placard. He said that there is no idea, this great strategy for Russian development. Back in the Orthodox Empire, we had this triad of values and then the moral code for the communism builders, and now we do not know what we are even building. They don't have the moral code for the capitalism builders. So I have this triad on my placard, and I would ask you to refer to our federal channels, the First Channel and the NTV, for them to hold a national discussions as to what kind of Russia we are going to build and we are going to see. So nature, motherland, people, this is what I suggest, and one cannot do without the other. So we are watching those TV shows where they talk about who cheated on who left who, and this is something absolutely unacceptable. But when, during those TV shows, we would actually discuss these issues, that would be a totally different matter. Can we organize a TV show which would discuss the strategically important development questions for Russia long-term, in the long-term perspective? It is not so often that we meet, because Andrei Konchalovsky is a very interesting person to talk to. He has thorough knowledge and he has his own opinion, and he's not shy to express it, regardless of whether anyone likes it or not. He is not trying to adjust to anyone. He says what he thinks. He's a very thorough and knowledgeable person. As to whether we have some idea for further development of our country, I've said it several times that in the best possible meaning, patriotism is the basis for a stronger statehood, in the broadest and the most noble sense of the word. Now, as for the fact that a lot of TV channels and on the internet we see some shows which is hardly worthy of the broadcast time that is allocated for it. I talked to Daniel Granin at our last meeting. We had a discussion, a private discussion. We've talked for a while, and I have not seen him after that because he died. And he said, you need to do something about it. With what? I said, we are all tired of this. Of what? Every TV channel shows like who stole what, stole how much, and how they stole it. So we are tired of that. And don't we have something light, something more light-hearted in our life? But I guess this is the strategy of those TV channels. That's what I said to him. But I guess that recently we see some improvements in this area as well, and information is becoming more well-balanced. Although I rarely watch TV and I do not often surf the internet, I just don't have the time for that. But I just try to follow the general events, and I guess that the situation is improving. But to discuss the topic that you suggested, well, I guess there's no harm in that. We need to discuss it with our colleagues. So everyone has heard what you said, and I guess that they would respond. Just a second. Chicago Tribune, please. And Afghanistan, yes, later on.
President Putin, Rachel Marsden with Tribune Publishing out of
И
Chicago,
Chicago Tribune, США. Вчера президент Дональд Трамп объявил о выводе своих войск из Сирии. Он также объявил, что, по его мнению, США победили ИГИЛ в Сирии. Он очень четко об этом говорил. Как вы относитесь к его заявлениям, и как вы относитесь к выводу войск из Сирии, и как вы относитесь к тому, что он сказал о победе над ИГИЛ со стороны США? И второе, есть ли у вас какая-либо беспокойность по поводу того, что американские войска в какой-то форме останутся в Сирии, потому что были обсуждения того, как, возможно, будут контрактные сотрудники присутствовать в Сирии. И таким образом США будет военным образом участвовать, но в более скрытой манере в Сирии. As for defeating ISIS, I do generally agree with the President of the United States. We've achieved some major advances when it comes to defeating the terrorists, and we have struck major blows on terrorists in Syria. There is a danger that those terrorist groups might now infiltrate the neighboring regions, for example, Afghanistan and other countries, and also to other countries, for example, their countries of origin. And this poses a great risk for all of us, including Russia and the US and Europe, for Asian countries and the Central Asian countries. We're aware of that, and we know about that. Yes, Donald Trump is right about that. As for the withdrawal of American forces, I'm not sure about what that is. The American forces have been present in Afghanistan for, some 17 years, and every year they talk about withdrawing their forces from Afghanistan. But they're still present there. That's my second point. And my third point, we do not see any signs of the American withdrawal from Syria, but we see that it is possible. And we are now on the track of political settlement, and now we want to form a constitutional committee in Syria. And when we had a meeting in Istanbul, Russia, Turkey, France, and Germany, we made the decision that we will do everything in our power in order to create this constitutional committee. And Russia, on its part, has done everything so that it would actually happen. It might seem strange, but we have indeed negotiated the list of candidates with President Assad. He presented a list of his candidates, 50 people, and he took part in the formation of the list from the civil society, 50 more people. And regardless of the fact that he doesn't like the list altogether, he still agreed to that. And the representatives of the opposition agreed to this list, and Iran agreed to this list. And then we presented the list to the United Nations, and it turned out, and Minister Lavrov told me yesterday, that at the initiative of our partners, Germany, France and the United States, now the UN representative special envoy, Staffan de Mistura, is actually trying to drag out the time. I'm not sure what is going on there, but I believe that we are at the final stage. I hope that we are at the final stage of this process. If not by the end of this year, then early next year, the list would be negotiated, and then we'll move on to the next stage of political settlement. Whether do we need the presence of the American military? I guess we do not need that presence. The presence of your troops is illegitimate. It has not been confirmed by the United Nations Security Council decision, because only the Security Council can make this decision, or you can be there on the invitation of the Syrian government, and we are there on the invitation of the Syrian government. You do not have either of those decisions, so if you've made this decision, it is the right decision. But there's one more important element. It's the fact that despite all the disputes and differences between our experts and our military and our security services and foreign ministries, we have a constructive dialogue on resolving the most acute issues of combating terrorism in Syria.
In general, we are satisfied with our joint efforts. Agriculture here, Vladimir Vladimirovich, agricultural newspaper. We didn't give them the floor yet. Microphone, please. We will not forget about Gazprom, no way. Just a second. Good afternoon. Ivanova Olga. I represent newspaper Agricultural Life, and we celebrated 100th anniversary this year, and you've congratulated us, and thank you for that. The question is the following. According to the statistics, the growth of agriculture recently has slowed down, in spite of the fact that we are not competing with anybody because of sanctions, and we have rather good environment for our work. How could you explain that? Are you preoccupied with that? And among national or federal projects, we don't have agricultural project. Why? Well, talking about national projects and agriculture, agriculture is part of our national projects for many, many years, and we are supporting with hundreds and hundreds of billions of rubles our agriculture, and we will keep doing this in relation to large farms and small farms in all areas of agricultural activities. As to the slowing down of our growth in agricultural area, yes, it's true, we are not preoccupied with that, and it's not a greenhouse environment for you. We still have competition inside our country. This is good, and it's very important for the development of this economic sector, and we have external competition as well. Not all countries impose sanctions against us. That's why we didn't impose counter-sanctions in relation to them. We've imposed sanctions in relation to EU and US and other countries which imposed sanctions against Russia following US initiative. But the majority countries didn't follow this example, and there are a lot of them. They are selling us their agricultural products. That's why we have competition. What is going on inside agricultural sector? Well, statistics. Statistics is linked to the production of grain. Last year we have a record high harvest, 135.5 25 million of tons of grain. This is the main indicator which actually influences statistics. This year, because of unfavorable climate conditions, and in certain areas we have imposed emergency situation. Because of that, we have 110.5 million of tons this year. And comparing to the last year, our indicators of this year went down. What this 110 million of tons is the third indicator for the last 25 years. It's a very good result. And taking into account last year's reserves, we've not only maintained but increased the possible export up to... we will implement all our contracts and obligations. So we are not preoccupied. We have areas where we have to be more active in the area of agriculture. We have to be more competitive. We have to expand our infrastructure, to expand our export. Last year we had 20 billion of export. This year we will have 25 billion of export. These figures, well, we're unmanageable in the first. It's more than arms and armaments which we are exporting. We keep supporting the development of infrastructure in the area of agriculture and export. To do this, we are setting aside more than 400 billion of rubles to develop ports, road infrastructure, and so on and so forth. To support financially our export, we have to be more competitive. We have to train our experts. We shall continue our selection work. We have to increase the production of high-processed products like meat and processed meat, and we have to solve problems related to social development of our agricultural areas. Crimea. No. Caucasus is not Crimea. Crimea. Please, you have the floor. Artem Artemenko, Crimea 24 TV channel. Recently you've mentioned that the imposition of restrictions against Russia by certain countries affects those who live in Crimea, and those who voted to be part of Russia, they are affected by that. Could you explain your words, and what shall be done about this? Well, it's true, I mentioned this, I don't remember where, but I can explain you. It's a rather peculiar situation. What we are hearing from outside, they keep mentioning annexation of Crimea by Russia. What is annexation? It's using force and taking this territory. If we are talking about using force in order to get Crimea back to Russia, then those who live in Crimea, they shouldn't be blamed. But if they came to, if they participated in the voting and they voted for this, then, well, sanctions have been imposed against you in relation to visa, your travel, in relation to financial operations, restrictions in relation to insurance companies, restrictions in relation to using sea and other infrastructure. This affects practically all people living in Crimea. Sanctions have been imposed against them, not only selective sanctions against those who are in charge of Crimea, but against everybody. If they shall not be blamed, if we're talking about annexation, why these sanctions have been imposed? But if sanctions have been imposed against you because of your voting, then it's the recognition of the fact that this voting took place. Live News. It's part of our pool. Just a second. Second row. Internet publication live. Vladimir Vladimirovich, we have state-supported program related to content development in TV programs. Can these measures be used in relation to internet channel? When you are going to get married, and who will be your wife? Are you married? Well, so he is married, and he would like me to be in the same shoes. Well, okay. I answered to your second question. As a decent man, I will do this sooner or later. I will have to do this sooner or later. Thank you. Now, supporting Russian segment of internet. Well, it's a correct thing, and it should be done, and we are doing this. We have grants. I don't remember what is the budget, but it's hundreds and hundreds of millions of rubles. Grants related to content. We are setting aside this budget, 144 billion, if I'm not mistaken, but in general, officially, we've set aside 400 million. We are doing this, and we keep doing this. Eurasian female community. After this question about my marriage is very important. Eurasian female community, Volufkina Marina, I'd like to thank you for assisting the second Eurasian Female Forum. It was very important for us. At that forum, we discussed mass media, and after we've conducted this round table, we've signed 14 memoranda, peace memoranda, signed by participants, and which have joined our campaign related to the positive information in our world. The question is whether it's important for you as a president to see all the journalists present here telling the truth, and to be a soft, objective force. And they should not just restrict their activities by solving business tasks. It's very important in present environment, in the situation of aggression and tension. We're afraid of war, so it's very important for the soft force to be active and to work. Do we have soft force in Russia, and what is the responsibility of journalism? Well, the truth is not in the force, in the strength, or the strength is in the truth, or the force is in the truth. That's why this formula actually reflects the responsibility of the mass media. The force is in the truth, and only this way mass media can get trust, earn trust of the millions and millions of people. But unfortunately, and that's true, our life becomes more and more commercial. Before it was politicized, but now it's commercial more and more. That's why trust vis-a-vis mass media has been eroded greatly. We are dividing everything by 100, by 1,000 when we read something or hear something, but this should be our aim. And no doubt that when it comes to issues vitally important for our country as well as for the entire world, we have to do our best to be as objective as possible. It's not important for me, it's important for everybody, for all of us. And I hope that this kind of trend, we do have it, and I hope to see it in the future as well. Afghanistan. I promised you to give the floor. Said Afghan news agency, December 6, Russia refused to support the draft resolution of GAUN related to the situation in Afghanistan because certain Western countries did not support it. Because of certain Western countries didn't agree with that. What the resolution was about? This was the draft resolution prepared by the Western countries. The Western countries believe that it's good. Russia doesn't believe that. What do you think? I would like to hear your opinion. But at the same time, U.S. conduct separate negotiations with Taliban movement. And taking this into account, how do you see the future of Moscow format for Afghan consultations? And 11 countries have been represented at these negotiations on the basis of Moscow format. You know, I don't remember the subtleties of the draft project you've mentioned, but I hope you will agree with me. The majority of people living in Afghanistan will support this, I'm sure. I don't know what our Western partners would like to achieve through this resolution. If they wanted to show that everything is rosy there, I don't think that it has nothing to do with the reality. The official government in Kabul, how much of Afghanistan they are controlling? Not more than 1/3 of Afghan territory, to be frank. They organize elections, but the results, they count results, it takes them months to count the results. So it's not normal. They what is the issue they're discussing at these negotiations, and what will be the result? There is a real force which controls the majority of the territory, and we should count with them.
But in that case, this has to be done publicly, openly. One has to understand what is at stake, what the substance of the negotiations is. And I believe that was the foundation of our foreign ministry's position during the discussion within the UN. We're not against a settlement. Moreover, we believe that a settlement can only be achieved solely through an agreement between the all parties to the political process in Afghanistan itself. But for that end, what we need to do is to reinforce our military base in Tajikistan. We assume that the people of Afghanistan will manage to come to an agreement within itself. All the political forces, all the ethnic groups are going to arrive at a consensus. And as far as we can, we're going to facilitate this process, in particular through developing our economic interaction with Afghanistan, through participating in different international projects such as TAPI, for instance. Mr. President, you can see Andrei Kolesnikov. For 4 years, you have not been given the floor. Well, what can I see? There is Mr. Peskov to blame for that. Andrei, could you please give your floor to the young lady? For 4 years, she has not been given the floor. Thank you very much. That it's not the 5th year in a row that I'm not given the floor. When a law on foreign agents was adopted, there was a great deal of noise about rights violation. A colleague of mine, I'm not going to name him, he asked, what's the situation with the human rights? What human? What man? That is what I'd like to ask you. Well, we mostly have this law regarding the foreign agents, legal entities, but Maria Butina was detained in the US as a physical person, an individual. And I have another question, because I represent the Tsargrad channel. We wanted to ask you what your view is on the situation in the World Orthodox Church, given the schismatic actions taken by the Constantinople Patriarchate and the Kiev. We all understand right now that the key player in that regard is the US, and we can see that geopolitics is looming large on religion. Is that so? Well, as for the first part of your question, we followed the international experience when we adopted this law on foreign agents. This law is not about prohibitions. The purpose of this law is as follows. If an organization gets funding for public political action from abroad, it has to register as such. And that is all it boils down to. And in particular, in the US, such kind of activities are prohibited. And here's an example for you. Butina has been arrested for violating this law, and what looms ahead for her is 12 years in prison, whereas in our case this is not so. And I do not see any problems in the enforcement of this legislation. I meet human rights activists on a regular basis, and sometimes they point out some issues related to the difficulties charities, for instance, run into. Because of this law, we have to follow the realities to see what is happening, and we have to make amendments. If it is necessary, we should not prevent people with integrity who want to do good from doing this good. But political activity should not be banned per se. It should be legalized. It should be registered. And the second part of your question, the world orthodoxy, what's happening in the world orthodoxy, it is inconceivable, because it is direct interference of the government within the affairs of a church. This has never happened since the Soviet times, and yet we are witnessing exactly that in Ukraine. They set up this united, schismatic church of under the Istanbul. Well, they didn't like it that it was under Moscow, now it's under Istanbul. And I like to point out that the Russian Orthodox Church and the Kiev Patriarchate of the Russian Orthodox Church, the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate, was so entirely independent. Not everyone knows that, but it was almost entirely independent. They even had the right to elect their own hierarchs, their own prelates. The only thing tying them together with Moscow was the spiritual bond. They mentioned one another during their sermons and the liturgy. And right now you see that the link with Constantinople is far stronger than that. Well, maybe that is what Bartholomew wants to do, to get money, because he wants to subjugate this territory and get money from these parishes, and they're doing that at the hint from Washington. And it is inconceivable that someone from the US calls Ukraine and gives advice on that. This is yet another testimony to the fact that this is being done in the run-up to the election campaign. The purpose of all of this is to tear the Ukrainian people and the Russian people even further apart. The foundation for these actions is purely political. This is not about religious freedoms. No, it is an infraction of religious freedoms. And what I'm concerned about is the redistribution of property that is going to follow, and that is already happening right now. And it can take on a very, very difficult nature, if not bloody. God forbid it comes to bloodshed. I would hate to see that. I see that people want to care for their own interests and they are vulnerable. They have nothing to protect themselves with. Mostly they are elderly or women, and they cannot protect themselves. And there is this intimidation, this menace of the redistribution of property. It's been 2 hours now. Andrei Kolesnikov, Kommersant newspaper. The French are protesting against the rise of the gasoline tax, and it has degenerated into an all-out protest. President Macron had to introduce an emergency state, an emergency economic state. What is your assessment of what is happening in France? Are you not planning to raise the gasoline prices in Russia, because that has been the talk recently? And how strong is the protest potential of Russian citizens in that regard? And what do you think has to prevail in this particular situation? The obligation to observe the rights of the demonstrants or to ensure order. These two last things you mentioned should be balanced, and there is no contradiction between them. On the one hand, you've got to observe the rights of the citizens to participate in public events and manifestations, but they have to stay within the limits of the law. Anything that steps beyond that is inadmissible, and the appropriate response from the government has to follow. Now, moving on to what is happening in France and how we view the developments there, let me say the following. I believe that the developments in France are certainly linked to the rise in the gasoline and diesel prices, but mostly the link is that of a trigger. It has been a trigger that has released this indignation and outrage of an overwhelming part of the a big part of the population. Most of them are French, born French. Around 70%, as far as I understand, according to the latest statistics, support that. But it would be incorrect for me to give an assessment to what the French government is doing. What is the difference between our situation and the French situation? The French government did it on purpose. It wanted to raise the prices on gasoline and petrol or oil products. It was their policy. What they wanted to do is to redistribute the resources of the citizens. They wanted to channel some of these resources into addressing the issues they had in economic policies. They wanted to use the money that they would have got from this rise and to channel it into developing renewables and alternative energy sources such as solar or wind power, and they did that deliberately, and people had an issue with that because they do not like such a change in the energy policy at their expense. What are we seeing in Russia? We had a pickup in the gasoline prices because the oil prices in the world markets had been growing, but the government wasted no time in taking the measures to prevent this crawl of the prices towards increase, and we managed to secure an agreement with the major oil refining companies. That is the difference. In France, the government wanted to raise these prices itself, and we had to fight this rise, which was happening of its own. Of course, this is a trend we are seeing, and we have secured this agreement, which is going to be in place until March next year. An adjustment can be made due to the rise in the VAT starting from January the 1st, but this adjustment is going to be very slight, within 1.5%, no more than that, and subsequently the government in Russia will have to follow closely what is happening in the Russian market, the world markets, the world markets, and if we get back to that, I'll go into more detail, if you want, But on the whole, even though this is a manual management mechanism, it yielded positive results, and I do hope that it is going to be functioning further, that the government is going to be able to prevent any hikes of prices on oil products next year. Calm down, please. I can't hear you. Colleagues, the protest potential of Russians. I responded to that. I said that the people have the right to express their point of view and to stand for it publicly on meetings, on rallies, but within the framework of law. I saw Razan television. The television, Alexandra Tinaeva, Kryryzansky TV company. We see digital television arriving very fast, and we see new types of televisions. And what is your assessment of the readiness of regions to transition to digital television? Aren't we going to see a situation when some small settlements are going to be left behind? How can we secure the interests of those who find it hard to buy even the cheapest STB? What are we to do in the regions, in that context, in the context of transition to digital television? It is going to be a very hard blow to our budget, and we're not going to survive in the analog format, and multiplex is also off limits to us. I support you, and I throw my full support behind you. My colleagues listen to me right now, and I talk to them, and when they insistently demand that we should follow the digital path, I agree that it raises the quality, the number of free-of-charge channels available to citizens, but almost just as you do, I ask a question of them. Let's take a small village. Is it not going to be left without television at all? They show me that it's not the case, and we're going to move very carefully, to tread cautiously. I think there is an experiment, a pilot in Tver, and as far as I understand, there are no problems, and the governor has reported to me. He has been almost to all villages and settlements. He is controlling the process personally. They're helping people to transition to the digital television, go digital. Afterwards, 2 or 3 more regions are going to join the fold. Yes, there had been an idea to transition very fast within 6 months, but I told them, no, we cannot do that. We have to tread cautiously. We have to test it, and we certainly have to care for the interests of those people who simply cannot afford to buy an STB, to spend their own money on that. So we will closely follow how it plays out in certain regions where pilots are being conducted.
Well, there is Sergei Brylov from Second Channel. Good afternoon, Mr. President. Due to well-known reasons, when we speak about national politics, we speak about conflicts. Well, probably the Chinese relationship is a different thing, but on the 20th of December, I'd like to present a case study of cooperation between Russian and British special services, of sending illegal agents of Soviet and British special services to the Nazi Germany. But what do you think about today's state of affairs between Russia and the United Kingdom? Sergei said, Dmitry Sergeyevich said that you haven't had a meeting, or he doesn't know whether you had a meeting with Theresa May. Have you met with her, and what is your attitude about the Brexit initiative, towards the Brexit initiative, with respect to meetings? At such events as G20, there are very many pull asides, or meetings on the sidelines. We speak on the go, we greet each other and we speak to each other, and probably this was the format we used with the British Prime Minister. We greeted each other and said a quick word with one another. With respect to Russia-UK relationship, it's gridlocked, I believe, and it is in the interests of both our countries to withdraw our ties from this gridlock. With respect to the Brexit impact on us, I think it's going to be minimal, but anyway, it is going to have an effect on the global and European economy, and indirectly it will definitely have an impact on us. Are we interested in restoring the full-fledged cooperation and relationship with Britain? Yes, we are, and I think Britain also is, especially the business community of the UK. There are a lot of British flagship companies around here, like BP is one of the major stakeholders of Rosneft, a leading Russian oil and gas company, and that British company operates on Russian market actively and wants to stay here. It's not only them who want to stay. Now, because of Brexit, if it is carried through, and by the way, I understand the position of the Prime Minister. It's up to them to decide. It's their internal domestic affair. I hope they wouldn't blame us, but the referendum is anyway passed, and she is to deliver upon the will of the people that was expressed at the referendum. Otherwise, would it be democracy to have another rerun and one more rerun? Anyway, let's wait and see how the Brexit critics respond. If they have one more referendum or a rerun. But would it be direct democracy? Would it be a proper referendum? It's their domestic business anyway. But what they want is markets and partnerships. We didn't discuss that with the Prime Minister, but we discussed that with our colleagues from the British business community that are quite numerous. If we look at the foreign direct investments, the bulk of the FDIs this year has flowed from the UK to the tune of $22 billion. It's seconded by Germany, Federal Republic, and Singapore is number 3, the third largest investor. Probably partly it is repatriation of our capital, but anyway the interest is huge. Like in agriculture, the potential is huge, as well as in industry and energy sector. And there are many other areas. I hope that the common sense prevails. I saw skis. I saw a sign with the writing skis. Where the skis are? The skis? Over here, right here. Thank you, Mr. President. Svetlana Shaganova, Karacháyevo-Cherkessia Regional Channel. I have a good example. Putin plus skis equals our region, Karacháyevo-Cherkessia, the Republic of Karacháyevo-Cherkessia. You are a fan of judo and sambo, and you've been practicing those for many years. But anyway, we would like you to visit our new ski resort, Arhiz, and have a go, have a try of the track. I would really very much like to do that. And anyway, I congratulate you on the development of the tourism cluster in your republic. Your region has been developing, promoting its competitive edges. This ski resort is one of them. If I have time in my schedule, I will definitely visit and attend. And the flag, I see a flag over here, the Russian flag. Please pass the mic over there. And a question about Gazprom will be next. Fetch the mic, please. Thank you. Ask newspaper from Armenia. My name is Buduyan Guar. Thank you. It's the fourth time I ask you a question. My question is about the following. how Russia will patch up its policies with Armenia after the elections. Why patching up? We haven't had any collapse in our ties. We have a good, sound relationship with Armenia. It's our strategic partner in the region and globally. It's a member of the CSTO, the Eurasian Economic Union. Why patch up or restore anything? We should follow up on what we already have, use the groundwork to carry it forward. The Armenian people is our closest ally, the closest ally of the Russian people in the South Caucasus region, which has always been the case, and I hope it will be the case in the future. We should face the realities of today's world and look at our needs and our capabilities, and with the Armenian Prime Minister we'll have a chance to discuss it during his visit next week. The question about Gazprom, why are you trying to frighten us? Viktor Smirnov, 47 News. I'll tell you why Gazprom has run out of gas, but first of all, reference information. Nord Stream 1 passes through the Leningrad region, and Nord Stream 2 is now being laid down, and you have inaugurated the Turkish stream, which is good, but many people in the residents of the Leningrad region haven't had gas supply, although pipelines are being built. And not long ago, Gazprom said that they could not supply gas to some residential areas of St. Pete. They don't believe it's practical to reconstruct a gas pumping station to supply gas to local community in that region. And a couple of years ago they stole a piece of pipe to the tune of 1.8 million rubles. There hasn't been any criminal charges brought or proceedings initiated. You know what, the documents say the pipe is there, but it's not, and the money has been written off, and there is no pipe. It's the Priozorsky area. You know it. I know it quite well. Yeah, I've been there. Yeah, for a while. And the gasification schedule for the Leningrad region are being postponed and synchronized, as they put it in their documents. So it has been thwarted, I mean, this program of gasification. And number 4, with all the issues that the gas monopoly has been facing and all the problems of the residents that haven't had gas supplies since 2009, anyway, the children of the members of the board of Gazprom don't have any scruples about occupying top positions at Gazprom daughters, and they fly by business jets and they put luxurious photos on Instagram. They don't have any scruples. So don't you think they have been playing too long with that? You know, you always should look at your spending, control your spending, and what matches they attended, and those business jets. But you know, Gazprom has been a sponsor of different international football clubs like Schalke 0.04. Why have they been doing that? Because they have been around in Germany and in Italy. You know, from this standpoint of common sense, it's okay, but you know, there should be some vigilance and control and oversight, public oversight. I'll make head or tail of that. I'll look into that. Who flies with what? As regards the gas supply inside the country, it's on the rise, and we're seeing more sales domestically, more than 200 billion cubic meters this year, which is a historic peak, and our economy needs that, our budget needs that, most importantly, because the bulk of the revenue of Gazprom that goes to the federal budget stems from exports. As regards domestic issues and gasification, you know, the program is in full swing, and it's not only about Gazprom. Gazprom just builds a pipe to a certain point on the border of the settlements and towns and cities and villages, but the last mile is the responsibility of the regional and municipal authorities. I'll double-check whether the pipe is there and whether they have laid down all the secondary pipes to settlements. Gazprom is basing its activities on the economic feasibility, but apart from that, there are some definitely considerations of providing gas to local people, to residents, to local community. I'll look into that, I'll study that. You know, quite often there is a gap between the real situation and what the regional or municipal authorities claim or state. It's the Priazovsk residential area and Vyborg and St. Pete, all these folks there, all the local community there want gas. I'll respond anyway, I'll study that, you know. I see, you know, probably we're having a smooth conference so far. Probably the Novaya Gazeta will provide some quick-fire question. Thank you. The question is as follows. This year, the Central African Republic, my colleagues lost their lives. 3 journalists. It's a huge tragedy. I express condolences. Is there anything known about the circumstances of their loss of life and whether the private military company Wagner is involved in that? And do you believe it is a right thing that the businessman that is called your personal cook, Yevgeny Prigozhin, heads this private military company, Wagner? And what do you think, by and large, what do you make of the activities by private military companies? Do you decline it is true, or probably you should be proud of them, because they operate in Syria, in Asia, in Central Africa, in other countries? And a short, quick question, another quick question. You know that the human rights champion Lev Ponomorov, which turned 77 years of age, has now been arrested to serve 15 days in custody for a post on Facebook. Let's start with Wagner and with the cooks. All my cooks are employees of the Federal Guard Service. They are military people. I don't have any other cooks. I want that to be clear, so that we don't come back on that, return to that any... Well, if you want to peg labels, it's up to these people, but you know, there is the notion of secure public catering, secure catering, and the Federal Guard Service is in charge now with respect to the Wagner military companies. Everybody should stay within the bounds of law.
We can ban any kind of private military contractors, but if we do that, they are going to petition you to protect this labor market, because around 1 million people work on that market. And if this Wagner company is actually violating something, then they should be punished accordingly by the relevant bodies. And as to their presence somewhere abroad, if they are not violating the Russian law, then they can promote their business interests anywhere in the world. And now, as for the tragedy that you've mentioned, this is indeed a tragedy. People have died, they have families, they have relatives. Unfortunately, there are a lot of tragedies related to journalists, and we should not forget about them, especially the journalist who died in the east and south of Ukraine when they were shot, or there was an attempt made on their life and they were basically just shot during military actions. We should not forget about those journalists as well. And your colleagues, as far as I know, came to Africa without notifying the local authorities. They came there not as journalists, but as tourists. And according to the latest data, some local groups attacked them. As far as I know, there's an investigation going there, and we do not have any outcomes yet, but we do hope that they will get something in the end. And through diplomatic channels, we are keeping the situation under our control and hope that someday we will find out what actually happened there. But I would like to bring my condolences to you and to the members of your office and the relatives and the close ones of those people who died there. Yes, go ahead, Vladivostok. You were the loudest. Mr. President, thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to ask a question. From the bottom of my heart, I would like to express my gratitude for your decision that Vladivostok is the capital of the Far East Federal Region, and thank you very much for that. At the last conference, I asked you questions regarding environment, the incineration plant, deforestation, etc., etc. Thank you very much for closing the incineration plant. I hope that it would not be reopened. But as for waste recycling, I guess there are some companies which would like to be engaged in separate collection of waste, but this is not being provided by local authorities because their land is actually on lease, and there are complications regarding that. Recently we had elections, and the most controversial part of the elections was the pension reform, and this led to these elections taking such a long time. And now, back to the environment. The sports facility that I talked about, it was closed and not completed, and those people who are under residence fraud, their houses have not been finished. And our Navy forces, there's a school in their region, 51, and the school has been closed, and now their children has to go very far to go to school. And the Forest Foundation and their lands are controlled by the state, as well as the strategic Prim water channel. And the forests have not been included into the cadastre records, and there's still deforestation going there, there's still cottages being built there, and lakes and ponds, which are supposed to be under the control of state, are actually owned privately, so please do something about that. Yes, okay, I'll keep it short. And now just a comment on the pension reform. I guess that you were lied to, because the pension deficit is 257 billion rubles as of this year, but when the commotion started, you added some 500 billion more to that number. Maybe you should pay some attention to that and maybe cancel the reform, because we are having this deficit and we are spending so much money, etc., etc. As for the pension fund, I'm finished with that. And wait, I would like to congratulate Mr. Vladimir Putin on the new year and to wish you every success in your future work. And the last thing, the very last thing I would like to say, Mr. Peskov said that he received some information. Guys, you know, regardless of all the other things that I asked, the most important question is, there's Vladislav Shostakov, he's aged 3, he's very ill in the Irkutsk region. He needs to be transferred to Moscow. People have raised the necessary sum. Just please help them with that. And all the questions that I have already asked, please respond to them. And take the necessary measures and bring the forest under the control of states, as well as the lakes and ponds. Let's start with the most sensitive question. I'm sorry to the representative of the Novaya Gazeta. You asked me about Lev Ponomarev. We asked that with the members of the Human Rights Council. It's not like I'm trying to deviate from answering this question, I just forgot about it. The decision was made with regards to Ponomarev because he called to for some unsanctioned rallies, and I'm not going to try to dispute the decision made by the court. I'm not going to argue about whether this decision is just or not. And now back to the very sensitive issue of the pension reform. At the start of the 2000s, and several years later, I have expressed my position, and that is, I am against raising the retirement age. And back then, it was impossible to do, and I still believe that that was the right decision at the time. Because the average life expectancy was very low, 65 years, and the amount of working people and the ratio to non-working people was different. It was acceptable, but now the situation is very different. It's not about the deficit. It's about the fact that we have less and less people working and more people retiring. Yes, we can close the deficit now, and that's what I said in my address. For 5 or 7 years, we might live as we are, but then we would still have to do this. We will have to have this reform, but that would be very abrupt, without any transition period, without any benefits, including benefits for women. So that would be a very sharp change. If there would be no understanding of those trends, I would never allow for this thing to happen, but this is an objective trend. We cannot ignore it. And I did understand how people would respond to this reform. You can explain all you want, but when it comes to a particular person, they are not very excited about that. I knew that I'm going to be criticized left and right. As for the leftists, we remember how, with their economic policy, they brought about the collapse of the USSR. In the 90s, they almost brought about the collapse of Russia. We wouldn't have Russia, we would have some Moscow state instead. But we've managed to prevent this situation, and the country keeps developing and keeps getting stronger. Of course, such reforms are very unpleasant, and they are not going to cause excitement in the society. But I would like to repeat again, if I would not be convinced that this is unavoidable, I would not adhere to the reform. As for your other questions about the forest foundation, the school and the sports facility, well, I need to look into that because those are private questions. I'm going to look into that, but I guess that Oleg Kozhemyaka is going to look into that. He can hear me now, I guess, so he will provide me with all the relevant information and report to me about that. As for the new administrative center in Vladivostok, Mr. Trutnev has talked about it for some years now. And Vladivostok has been developing very rapidly and is a true center of the region. It's like a gravitation center when it comes to neighboring countries, so I guess this decision was long overdue. We have not asked any internet media, and we have two here, the Znak and Gazeta.ru. Those are internet media representatives. Can we engage this segment as well? Yes, starting with you. So we are actually recording this. So where is the boy and what's wrong with him? He is ill. Yes, we are going to collect the information from you. Our colleagues are going to approach you for some additional details. Yes, please. My name is Anastasia Melnikova, Znak.com. Mr. President, we have received reports, alarming reports about tortures in prisons, in detention centers, etc., etc. And I talk about Sverdlovsk, Chelyabinsk regions, Orenburg regions, Saratov regions, Khakassia, the Zabakalye region, and thanks to our colleagues from Novaya Gazeta, we've heard about the awful tortures in the Yaroslavl prisons, and we've heard about Vyacheslav Tsepovaz, who was imprisoned, and yet at the same time he had access to various types of luxury, such as crabs and caviar. Do you think that there's a much-needed reform now required for the detention system, for the prison system? So what is going to be done about that? Who is going to be responsible? And when is it going to happen so that Russian prisons would not be a resort to some of us, and for others would be a middle-aged torture chamber? Because what is going on in the system now, that's too much even for our country. The situation in detention centers and in prison should be kept under the control of the prosecutor's office. And of course, what we see these days, this is absolutely unacceptable. Any violations of the law, any tortures constitute a crime, and those violations, those crimes should be punished. And this is the case when, including with the help of the media, these facts come to our attention. But to say that we need to restructure the system altogether is wrong. We need to advance this system, and we need to advance the level of civil control over those systems. At the same time, I would like to remind you that we have the relevant commissions in place, and they will receive support from the state and from the president, and I hope that they would play a positive role in resolving these issues which are indeed present in the system. And the second question from Gazeta.ru. My name is Rustem Falechov, Gazeta.ru. At this press conference, when you opened it, you talked about the macroeconomic outcomes of this year, and we are living much better these days, and the Parisians should be envious and jealous. Actually, those people who live in Paris are moving on to suburbs for a number of reasons. So this dissatisfaction was caused by the rise in gasoline prices, and many Parisians moved to the suburbs because such a rise in prices was a hard blow on their family budgets.
But it's another issue. Let's talk about our situation. Well, I'm questioning the reliability of statistics and the information which is used when the level of life is measured in Russia, how Russians feel now. If we believe the information from our government, the income is growing 0.5%, prices are going down, but when Russians look at the price tags associated with goods and services, they do realize that civil servants just manipulating figures. Statistics of Ministry of Labor, Ministry of Finance, etc. They're just manipulating figures. Experts, they are surprised by these figures, and probably because of the fact that our life is harsh, experts are proposing to introduce a rather exotic happiness indicator, which will allow to take into account what Russians feel. The official statistics should be fine-tuned. If not, then your May decree will be implemented, but the happiness indicator will equal 0. Well, I do understand your preoccupation. Partly I share it, but only partly, because we shall explain better to our citizens where these figures came from and what do they mean and how one should react to them. because when you quote just figures and when you say that on this basis that the life is better and the life is happier, but when people take into account prices, then they end up with not believing official statistics. And it's not an ideal situation. The statistic is not an ideal, but the main thing is that we are not talking about the quality of statistics, and it should be fine-tuned. We shall explain our citizens that we are talking about average indicators. We are talking about a level of life indicator. We are talking about level of our salaries. And I mentioned that 7.4%, and at the end of the year will be 6.9% increase of salaries. But people could say, well, I don't have it. But this is an average figure which covers certain regions and certain sectors. In certain sector we have this increase, say, for example, in hydrocarbons, or in other sectors we don't have it. This is an average figure indicator. And one of the most important indicator is has to do with the income of our population and the volume of sales. These figures do correspond more or less to the real situation. In 2015, we had minus more than 2% of the income of population. In 2016, minus 5.8. In 2017, 1.2, and again minus 1.2. I'm talking about income in the pockets of our population. Experts know what would do this mean. These figures mean. I spent 30 seconds to explain how they calculate these figures. Well, costs, expenditures of our citizens. It's easy to calculate how much our people pay. So they spend this money. So it means that they have this money. Then we add to this cash reserves and money people have on their accounts. The central bank, which regulates cash flow, understands how much banks have on the accounts, individual accounts. It's more difficult to calculate money which our citizens have in foreign currency. Then we deduct taxes which people pay, say, property tax and so on, and then they adapt it to inflation. Those are real income of population. For many years in the past, they've been going down, and only this year at the end we could have +1 if we don't take into account what we will pay, what we have paid to our old age pensioners at the end of 2017. But there are other data, for example, volume of sales. They're increasing, say, automotive sector. There are problems, but 27% increase we saw there. I mean, the sales, the production of clothes, shoes has increased. The production of food has increased 13%. The volume of air travel has increased 46%. Outside Russia and inside Russia there is increase, more than 20%. It means that the purchasing power is growing step by step, but it is growing. If you explain to the population this way, then it will be clearer where we are and where we are heading. But we have to fine-tune the system. I do agree with you. Mir with Russian flag. Well, we have to give the floor to those to Russian flag. Microphone, please. Microphone. Thank you, Vladimir. Vladimir, first of all, I'd like to say that my flag actually was a problem for operators. Russian flag cannot be a problem to anybody. You see, camera operators, I represent GTRK Dagestan. We live in a multi-ethnic country, big country. It's good. Is it not? Yes, it's very good. It's a short question, but I'd like to add a couple of words. I'm lucky. I live in a multi-ethnic country, in multi-ethnic republic, and a multi-ethnic family. I am Russian. My husband is Avarish, and our kids. You look like Dagestani lady. Well, I spent a lot of years in Dagestan, so when I gave birth to my kids, I actually started to pay attention to what our TV is broadcasting. And in our commercials, we have very beautiful kids, nice hair, blue eyes. But what about other ethnic groups? For example, Mongols. We have more than 200 ethnic groups in Russia. And let's take Kremlin regiment. There are only Slavs serving there, and there is criteria, unspoken criteria that only Slavs could be part of Kremlin regiment. Don't you think that it's true? No, I don't think so. It's not like that. So, and here I have a request. Please pay attention to the criminal case of murder of Gasan Guseyev brothers. During the special operation, 2 kids have been shot down, and later it was proven that they had nothing to do with illegal armed groups, and they have not been fighters. Then the criminal case has been requalified, and now it's the murder case. But it's not over. Please, could you monitor this criminal case related to the killing of Magomed Guseyev and Nabi Guseyev, 2 brothers? Could you rehabilitate these guys officially? Poor parents. I will tell Bastrykin officially, Bastrykin Alexander Ivanovich, he will pay attention to this criminal case. It's the first time I hear about that, but he will pay attention to this case, and he will inform me, brief me about the results. Turkey. Turkey. Fuat Safarov, expert in Turkish affairs. Distinguished Vladimir Vladimirovich, recently Turkey celebrated the anniversary of Kemal Atatürk, the founder of Turkey. What do you think about Atatürk? How do you assess his historical role in geopolitics? Talking about Atatürk, what is the situation in relation to the links between Russia and Turkey presently? That's it. Thank you. Atatürk, no doubt, is an outspoken personality in Turkish history. He did a lot in restoring and maintaining Turkish statehood. He did a lot to do that, and he was a great friend of Russia. We know that he cooperated with Russia, and we evaluated highly. Atatürk created a modern Turkish state, created its basis. That's my attitude. Talking about present relations, we are satisfied with Russian-Turkish relations, be it in economy, be it in security area. Although our interests, there are areas where our interests do not correspond to each other, but we managed to find compromise solutions, for example, in in relation to crisis in Syria. We respect national interests of Turkey and Turkish people, and we see that our Turkish partners are ready to follow these compromise solutions, and they are looking for these compromises together with us for the benefit of the situation in Syria, for the benefit of fighting terrorists, and for the benefit of consolidating our relations. In economy, you can see it yourself. Our relations become more and more solid. Turkey, in spite of the fact that it's part of NATO, Turkey implements its obligations, but at the same time, its foreign policy is independent. We highly appreciate it. It makes it possible to forecast our future and to make our relations stable and solid. And here the President plays an outspoken role. And we hope that the same tendency will be in the future under Mr. Erdogan, President Erdogan authority. The retail radio company of CIS. Please ask your questions fast, because we are working for 3 hours already. Good afternoon, Mir. At the forum, Russia is calling. You said that the dollars are going out of Russia. What are the benefits and what are the pluses and minuses? Will our own currency appear in the future? And are we going to use the new digital technologies, for example, blockchain? It's a very important and interesting question as to the dollars coming in or going out to our economy and from our economy. Well, according to IMF data, the transactions in dollars in the world has decreased. Last year it was 63%, now it's a little bit more than 62%. Dollar transactions in dollar in relation to Russia equals 69%. Why? Because our main export goods, mainly oil, is quoting in the world in dollars. Our currency and gold reserves in dollars are decreasing. We used to have American bonds which are quoting in dollars, 104 billion of dollars. Now we have 14.4 billion of dollars worth of these bonds. We are now using more yens and pounds. As to the dollars going out, it has to do with the trade operations between companies and not between physical persons. Yesterday we talked about our today's press conference, and Dmitry Sergeyevich mentioned that the posters which showed currency exchange rate in Moscow and in other towns, and citizens keep asking why, whether we are prohibiting dollars. No, we are not going to prohibit dollar, to ban dollar.
No, this is due to one simple fact. We are trying to fight illegal organizations that exchange currency. We're simply trying to establish more order in financial transaction and the turnover of exchange services. We're trying to fight the grey sector, so to speak. As for the role of ruble, its role as a reserve currency used in transactions is growing, albeit slowly and slightly, mostly in the Eurasian Economic Union and in the post-Soviet space. For instance, the role of ruble has increased up to 60 or even 70% in the settlements between Russia and Belarus in non-cash transactions, but in cash it's smaller. The role of the ruble in this particular segment is going to become stronger because that is reliable and it doesn't make us incur any additional costs, especially the ones we incur in dollar-denominated transactions. We know very well that wherever such transactions happen, they are always channeled through the banks, and if there are restrictions introduced, there is a natural desire to try to go around these restrictions. This is comprehensible, and there are some issues of uncertainty and instability involved in dollar-denominated settlements right now. But in order for ruble to strengthen as at least a regional reserve currency, several issues have to be tackled. The first one is to tackle volatility. The currency exchange rate of the ruble has to be stable, and recently we have been more or less been able to do that thanks to the actions taken by the central bank, by the government of Russia. As you can see, the currency exchange rate is more stable. It has even managed to break free of the fluctuations of the oil prices greatly thanks to the introduction of a floating exchange rate. But we've got to go even further. We've got to ensure stability, to ensure a low inflation rate, which is very important. But moreover, we've got to develop the financial infrastructure that is necessary for ruble-denominated settlements. We've got to improve the mechanisms for settlements between economic operators and other organizations which is going to do that. Maybe we give the floor to Wall Street Journal. Wall Street Journal, please. A question from our foreign friends. Yes, we'll also have the chance. Good afternoon, Mr. President. Thank you very much for this opportunity to ask a question. In the West, many politicians and experts, even ordinary people, view Russia as a big threat. And they even think that you, as President of Russia, seek to rule the world. Yes, certainly. And I'd like to know whether that is indeed what you seek to achieve. And could you please tell us what the real goal of your foreign policy is? Thank you. Well, as for trying to rule the world, we know very well where the headquarters are that are trying to do exactly that, and these headquarters are not in Moscow. Why is that? This is due to the leading role of the United States in the world economy. This is due to the expenditure on defense. More than $700 billion are spent by the US on defense, whereas we have just 46. And NATO countries have 600 million people, and we have 140. Do you really think it is our goal to rule the world? No, this is just a mentality imposed by some in order to achieve some internal goals. Inside the NATO bloc, for instance, they want to make NATO countries unite. And in order to unite these countries, an external threat is required. Otherwise, this unanimity is not going to be achieved. You've got to have someone against whom to rally. And Russia is a very good candidate for that because it's one of the biggest nuclear powers as far as internal politics are concerned. Especially in Eastern Europe, Russophobia is still flagrantly thriving. And why is that? That is because this historical fears are used in order to secure internal political benefits. And this is detrimental because they're trying to to employ the phobias of the past, and it prevents us from moving forward. And it is even harmful to those leaderships that are trying to pursue such a policy. As a matter of fact, the true goal of our foreign policy is to secure a beneficial environment for the development of Russia, for its economy, for its social sphere. We'd like to secure an advancement and progress. We would like to make our country stronger internally, and for it to occupy the place it is worthy of in the international arena as an equal partner among equal partners. What we speak for is strengthening the international law framework. We have to secure a strict observance of the United Nations Charter, and on this equal footing to develop our interaction with all foreign players, with all countries. The question about contributors. Yes. Yes, please take your seat. You'll have a chance to ask your question. I cannot see you. Alla Andreeva, where are you? Alla Andreeva, Razan newspaper. Mr. President, thanks a lot for giving the floor to me. My address comes to you from St. Petersburg. St. Petersburg? Yes, I was born in St. Petersburg. Razan newspaper, and yet St. Petersburg. The tentacles of St. Petersburg are everywhere. Well, I work not where I was born, just as you do, yes, far from the place where we were born. Please pay attention to the contributors to the building, to the construction of new homes that have been deceived. Right now, such new houses are being commissioned, even though there is a huge violation of the contracts. During the direct line with you, there were federal inspectors right next to the house, which was not yet completed, and yet it was commissioned, even though the works were not completed. And you see, there is a hunt against myself and against others. There are criminal proceedings they're trying to bring against me because I'm trying to speak the truth about the bureaucrats, the officials. In 2015, my husband was killed, and the investigation is still stalling. For the first 18 months, my life turned into a nightmare, just as the life of my family, because there was a leakage of information from the investigation, and my mother heard about that, and she died because of that. She couldn't bear it. And this is happening in St. Petersburg, which we were born in. Please pay attention to us, to those people who are deceived. We're not intimidating. We are as human as you are. Come to St. Petersburg, do meet with the activists, and we're going to tell you all the truth without all these Potemkin villages and doctored papers and documents and reports they're publishing. There are many people, hundreds of activists. This is a cry for help, not just a request. And as for the investigation as concerned for my husband's death, do you think these two things are connected? The death of your husband and the deceived contributors? Yes, I can promise you that I'll pay attention to that, I'll look into that. And secondly, as far as the issue is concerned that you've raised, please sit down. Yes, it is a very acute matter, and it gives me a chance to talk more about this issue and the problems we have in the construction industry. This will never end if we do not set this sphere in order, if we do not transition to a civilized mode of residential construction. Indeed, the construction companies have to build 120,000 million square meters, and we've got to stop this practice of using the money of citizens for the construction without being held accountable. Yes, indeed, we managed to rein in the prices on residential housing. But because there is a discrimination, some people have a chance to get house at a smaller price. So money is taken from part of the people and they get nothing, neither their money back nor a house or an apartment. And that is the root of the problem. That is the foundation. And that is why we've got to transition to civilized procedures for funding this construction, even at the cost of a certain deceleration in the construction sector, even at the cost of a certain increase in prices. Otherwise, we will never succeed. We've got to transition to banking financing. We've got to use the reliable procedures for that. And as for people who find themselves in a very difficult situation when they have lost their money and they cannot get an apartment, these people deserve our help, and we shouldn't turn a blind eye to the scale of this issue. It is huge. The statistics that we've got is very significant. A number of people have been deceived. And in reality, it is even more acute than we see from the reports, from the documents. As far as your personal situation is concerned, I do not know the situation on the ground, but I'll talk to the acting Governor Alexander Dmitrievich, who's a very experienced person, and he'll be able to address this matter, and I do hope that it's going to change for the better. But rest assured, this is something I'm going to talk about with him, and the first thing he's going to do is he's going to meet you. Mr. President, Marina Kim is right in front of you. Colleagues, distinguished colleagues, if you want to go on a little further, then we shouldn't turn our press conference into a rally, an unsanctioned one to boot. So let's not do that. So please keep calm. Let us authorize the big game, Marina Kim, to ask a question. The first channel, thank you very much, Mr. President, for the chance to ask a question. And that is about the question whether there are non-Slavonic faces on the Russian television. Yes, there are, like myself. I appear on the first channel every day. The big game is about international relations, and our question is whether a meeting is possible with Mr. Trump after he cancelled it himself, and in the near future. And Rudyard Kipling in the 19th century said that the big game would only be over once all the participants would die. Very well. You ask a question about whether there's going to be a meeting, and then you see that everyone is going to die. There was a question about health. I think it's going to be the next one. In the 19th century, there was this confrontation between the Anglo-Saxon world and the Russian world. Has it changed now or not? Regrettably, as Marx said, the birth marks of the past persist. Well, I do hope something is going to change for the better. One way or another, we'll hit the bottom, and we'll see that we'll have to spring up from this bottom to go up, to have a breath of fresh air, and to think clearly as to how we are going to live further. Whether a meeting is going to happen, I don't know. On many occasions I said that we are willing to meet, and I said that there are issues we've got to talk about together. Well, at the expert level we work on Syria, for instance, but we've got to talk about North Korea, about Afghanistan, and on a great number of other problems in the world. We also have to talk about our bilateral agenda. This is something we are interested in, and our American counterparts are interested in that as well.
Well, definitely we have only 28 billion of dollars of mutual trade, which is a very small figure, very small value, and it has been reducing, and no one is interested in that, including the US President, who has been promoting the idea of the economic recovery and making America great again and restoring its economic might and power. And I believe that cooperating with Russia in the economic sphere, bearing in mind that us are one of the key stakeholders in the global energy market, matters a lot. And apart from that, the non-proliferation and global security are also a relevant topic for us to talk. And we can see what has been happening there. Now the Congress majority will change, and one can project with 100% certainty that there will be new attacks launched against the incumbent president, and whether he would be able to launch a direct dialogue with Russia, I don't know. Better ask them. But what concerns me, you told about the Anglo-Saxon world. Inside this world, there is some overhaul, some reshuffle, tectonic shifts. Just look, Trump has won, which is an obvious fact, but not everybody is willing to accept this victory, although it is a uniform truth. And they have been doing their utmost to legitimize their president. Or in Great Britain, after the Brexit referendum, no one wants to deliver upon the results, upon the will of the people. No one recognizes the results, and the democratic procedures have been unraveling, have been falling apart. It is a serious process to consider, to contemplate and study, and British and other experts have been studying that. And no matter what has been happening there, anyway, we should establish bilateral ties, and we're ready for that. As soon as the other side is ready, we would be eager and ready to proceed. You promised to, how's your health sign, to give the floor to how's your health sign. You mean my health or the healthcare state in this country? Afternoon. My name is Ekaterina, the Federal TV channel, Ministry of Ideas. What is the name? Ministry of Ideas TV channel. It's a private TV channel in Yekaterinburg. So the question about your health. How's your health? How are you feeling? Oh no, you will not see me off. Because everybody is concerned about their own issues, but no one worries about you. Do you need any help in some matters? What is your name? Ekaterina. Katya. We'll discuss that later with you. You know, look, no, I have a proposal to make. A suggestion. Yeah, I'm all ears. We know that ideas underlie everything, and concepts underlie everything, and our life, our future, and the well-being of our companies is built upon ideas. So we suggest we should establish a Ministry of Ideas of the Russian Federation. It's a very good idea, I think. So we would like to learn what is your opinion, what do you make of that, and we would be ready to help establish this ministry, this governmental body. I previously assumed that the Economic Development Ministry should have this function. They should generate the development concepts and ideas and come up with blueprints. I'm ready to discuss your suggestion, your concept, but just probably you should first think among your colleagues what should be the functionality of this ministry, the scope of that ministry, and job description. With respect to my health, it's regular as well as everybody else's health. I practice sports. I think I'm fine, and as anyone else, you know, in cold periods of the year, I sometimes may suffer from colds or other things, but now I'm fine. I feel well, thank you. sports haven't been mentioned. The Soviet sport newspaper. Something about the pike. Nikolai Yeremenko, the Soviet sport newspaper. I will be brief. There have been many sports developments. I will not mention the World Cup. We have been quite a successful organizer. It's a pity no one recalled that today, and Mutko yesterday was dismissed from football, definitely and finally. And we'll mark our 95th anniversary, and we hope to see you as a guest at our editorial house. Now the questions about doping practices, which is a chronic issue. It has become a political issue, I believe, and we have been subject to sanctions, and the international sports associations and federations are ready to bite us. But, you know, for our sports officials, it is quite convenient. You may not do anything, just blame sanctions on everything. But can you tell us that we have cleaned ourselves up to the extent that we can say we're fine and we're clear? Now, you know what? To a large extent, it's our fault, I mean, what has happened, because doping was used, which is one thing. Another thing is that it was government-backed. It is not true. It has never been the case. It will not be the case in future, because we shouldn't only think about the outcomes of the sports events, but about the health of our athletes. But we have had facts of doping. We should concede that, admit that, and we should accept it has been our guilt. We haven't been able to fight doping successfully in the past. And probably the public structures are to blame on that, and they should have worked better and tried harder. Have we cleaned ourselves up? I think not fully, not completely, despite the fact that we have provided good practices and standards. We need better quality of procedures and services, but it's not uniquely our problem, because doping is used worldwide. And now we're having a WADA Commission visit. Currently, they are in talks with our Ministry of Sports. They are investigating the probes and samples and materials, looking into those, and I think there is some element of politicizing now. I hope it's gonna be past in future. We'll turn the page. We've been working for quite a long, and we've been here for more than 3 hours. Probably we should conclude. In this respect, in this regard, colleagues, please be quiet. Otherwise, we'll call it a day. In this regard, I suggest, like, we have 3 veterans here, the federal Russian journalism veterans, Terehov Interfax, Gamo from Komsomolskaya Pravda, and Kondratyev NTV channel. So, in closing, let us give them the floor. And probably later on I will pick up some of the colleagues from the hall. The 3 of you are the most experienced, so be succinct, be concise. Okay, at the outset we talked about medicines and health and healthcare and other things. To a huge extent, all that our health depends on medicines. To what extent we are autonomous and independent, I mean, this country, in our medication basis and stockpiles, and can we compare our medicines with international and foreign ones in terms of their efficiency, and who is in charge of the development of our analog medicines? And the fact is that they are worse than planned originally. You know, it's a versatile issue, multifaceted one, and we should bring it to order. You asked who is in charge of the fact that our analogs are worse than the international ones. Ours are not worse, but, you know, we should fight on several battle camps at the same time. Our developers and doctors should think more about how to treat and cure patients successfully. Like, every now and then someone states that our medications are worse than imported ones. Let's switch to foreign medicines. But you know what? If a foreign medication, an imported medication, is desired for a specific patient, it should be prescribed. Now, with respect to the volume, we have started exporting drugs, medical drugs, to the tune of 700 billion rubles, which is not too big an amount, but anyway, it is something. And 30% of all that that we have in circulation in our market is Russian original medications, and 60% is packaged medications. Now, with respect to interdependence, now globally everybody is dependent on one another. With respect to our degree of autonomy, we produce 80% of the essential drugs on our own, mostly. It's not only about generic drugs, but also we manufacture the original feedstock and substances in this country, and have had a program in place on the development of medical industry. It is underway, and it spells out that the volume should be around 200 billion rubles. It is being implemented quite effectively, and we will continue acting in this vein. Gamov, another veteran, antibiotics, one of the signs says. Now the floor to Gamov. The veteran has lost a mic. Just in a nutshell, Komsomolskaya Pravda website, newspaper and radio station. Mr. President, you know, today I feel sorry for President Putin because the figures are sleek and wonderful and beautiful. They're truthful, and the specialists confirm that. I mean the numbers, but the ordinary people probably would not believe all of that, because we have a hard existence, number one. And number two, at the bottom of our hearts and at our minds, we are not at ease. We have concerns and preoccupations about the future of our country. Why is that happening? Because the governors are afraid of Putin and the ministers are afraid of Putin. You have brought them to order. But you know, the public officials speaking about the sausage excise levy, or someone saying that Kremlin bars people from giving birth to children, they bring the society into turmoil and disrupt faith in President, so probably would need some reforms. Something must be done with this mid-level of public officials. They should be trained better and brought up. And my final point, on the eve of the press conference, I received a cable. Gamov asked President Putin, isn't it time to pay heed to the huge glaring gap between the income of top managers and common folks, and when Mr. President will make a clear statement in this respect. Thank you. Your point is, you know, perennial, eternal. It's a chronic Russian statement or assumption. We have a good Tsar, and the noble people are thieves and swindlers. But you know what? If we fail in something, everybody is to blame. And you know what? It's not about the numbers and whether they're correct or not. The point is that there is no public awareness campaign. No one explains it to people what has been happening. Because you heard that in the middle and at the outset of the press conference, I have said that we have had a drop in the real disposable income of our people. I'm not saying it's good. It slumped back in 2015 In 2016, it was minus 5.6% of take-home pay. I'm not saying it's good, but we should rectify that somehow.
I don't believe that people do not trust these numbers, but I guess that those are realistic figures and people understand that. And as for the officials in general, there are people who do not take heed of what they actually say, those people who are in the wrong place, those people who are not careful with their statements. There are people like that, but that's us. This is our environment. He used to be someone else, but now he's an official, and so he might slip from time to time. It means that he is not prepared to occupy such position. Of course, you must be prepared to work with all kinds of people, with all kinds of officials and functionaries, and there are lots of good people among them too. There's no avoiding it, really. You can't just, put something in the box, close it, then open it again, and everything is great. So Moses, it took Moses 40 years to lead the Jewish people out of the desert, but we do not have that time. This is a natural process of coming of age for a state. So we are holding all sorts of competition among young leaders, for example, the leaders of Russia competition. And we then send them to our academy, and from these people, 10 or 15 people have become governors, 2 ministers, 5 or 6 deputy ministers. So we are going to keep promoting this practice, but it would take a while. As for the gap, unfortunately, there is such a gap. That's the first thing I want to say. And secondly, unfortunately, this is a global trend. This is the case with major economies. Just look at the United States. Our colleagues from the United States are here, and they probably read their own analytical pieces, and they understand that the gap between the richest and the poorest is growing wider. And in this regard, President Trump, during his campaign managers have caught on that and actually used it in order to win the election, so they were right to do that. We need to take that into account. And we need to majorly cut the amount of people living below the poverty line. That is true. Okay. So the last question from another veteran. I'll keep it very brief. Mr. President, during a previous press conference, you said that you collect the emotions, and this is what constitutes your wealth. So, what year and what was the main event that enriched you? Well, the first one was the presidential elections. That is an important event for the entire country. And the second event is the World Cup. Again, this is a very important event for our country and for the world. Ussurisk, please. Right there. Yes, Ussurisk. What? Calm down, everybody. Yes, please. Ekaterina Harinova, Ussurisk. Mr. President, last year you signed the decree to transfer the capital of the Far East to Vladivostok from Khabarovsk. So what are the plans of the government to strengthen the region, first and foremost the Primorsky region, and will we have gasification? And what do you think about unifying our region and the Sakhalinsk region? As for any sort of unification, this is actually a matter to be resolved by the regions themselves in accordance with the Russian law. If Sakhalin and the Primorsky region would like to unite, then they should hold special procedures, for example, referendum, or organize it through the legislative bodies, just like you have it in your laws. And Sakhalin is a self-sufficient region. They have a good budget. Their average income is higher than that of the region on the whole. So this is a matter to be resolved between the two regions. As for strengthening the region, we have a comprehensive set of measures for the development of the Far East. First and foremost, creating proper conditions for developments. That's Far East Hector, the development of infrastructure, ports, airports, the support for export, first and foremost, non-energy exports. We are going to keep working on that. This is not going anywhere. So there's no doubt about that. This is one of the key areas for country's development. This is the avant-post of our country in the Far East. And this gives us advantages. We will keep developing science, education. We will keep supporting the Federal University. We will also work on developing shipbuilding. And we are going to build a shipbuilding plant in Vladivostok. You know that the first steps have already been taken. Those were major steps. We are going to build the biggest ships in Russia there, and such large ships have not yet been built in the Soviet times. We are going to support the aviation industry, and all the plants would have relevant orders commissioned to them. And there's a whole new area also emerging, space and space activities. Our new launch pad in Vostochny, marine biology, everything related to fisheries. We will keep all of that under our control. And I do not doubt that we will have some positive results. Now, Euronews, please. Good afternoon. Galina Pavorskaya, Euronews. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to ask my question. I'll put the placard down. The UN adopted the resolution on the militarization of Russia of the Sea of Azov and the part of the Black Sea. After what happened to the Ukrainian vessels in the Kerch Strait, there were reports that Russia is supplying military equipment to Crimea. Why Russia wants to have a military build-up in the region? And is Russia ready to declare the whole naval area its territory, part of its territory? In 2014, the people living in Crimea came to the referendum and they voted for the unification of Crimea with Russia. And after a set of relevant domestic procedures, Crimea became a part of the Russian Federation, a part of Russia. And at any part of our country, we have the right to implement our military policy in the way that would provide for our military security, and Crimea is no exception. If the General Staff, if our border guards believe that this has to be done, we will do that. Russia's security would be ensured. We are not going to come up with something extra, but what is required will be done. Now, as for the Sea of Azov and the Kerch Strait, from the outset, we said that we are going to build a bridge to connect us to Crimea. First, we've erected, so to say, an energy bridge. Now we have 2 power plants being constructed in Sevastopol and Simferopol with a power of 940 megawatts. We are building the Tauride road, and at the end of 2020, Next year, there's going to be a two-way road, then there would be a four-way road. So we are not talking about the military build-up per se, but also the civil infrastructure. And that is going to take place. We have the federal program for the development of Crimea in place, and the coming 2 years, we've allocated 300 billion rubles for the development of the region. At the same time, we will also strengthen the military component as is required. As for the Kerch Strait, the situation is indeed very complicated because the strait is quite narrow and quite shallow, just some 13 meters in depth, and at all times there was the pilot navigation there, and nothing stands in the way of building a bridge there. Just like before, pilots guided their ships through them. That's the case nowadays. The cargo turnover is growing there, including in the ports of the Sea of Azov. And all the economic players know the rules. There is a queue, right? Sometimes it can be longer or shorter. Just look at the port of Novorossiysk. There's a long queue of vessels there. On the 11th of September of last year, the Ukrainian vessels, including military vessels, have adhered to all the rules of passing through the strait and under the bridge, did not have any problem with passing to the Sea of Azov. They were guided by our pilots, and then they reached their port of destination. Nobody stood in their way. We've aided them. But this time it was different. This was a deliberate provocation as part of the election campaign of Mr. Poroshenko. And we've said that we've already shown the ship journal, and it said to pass covertly. And what does it mean, covertly? Without the pilot's involvement, no one knows what's going to happen. And those people in Kiev who set the tune, they talk about that they're ready to actually blow the bridge up. We cannot allow that to happen. As for ordinary day-to-day activities, they are not limited in any way. As for the Sea of Azov, we have a treaty of 2003, and what does it state? It states that the shore area of 5 kilometers, not according to the international standards 12 nautical miles, but 5 kilometers from the shore, this is the territorial waters of the state, be it Russia or Ukraine. And everything else is a neutral area. And when our fishers were actually seized, they were actually seized in those neutral waters. They were not entering the territorial waters, and they are still detained, and Euronews is silent about that, as if it's a common practice. The same was the case with our Navy members, and our vessel was once again seized, and nobody talks about that. Nobody remembers that. We are ready to stick to our agreements, and we are not taking any unilateral measures. As for military vessels, you should keep in touch with border control, because they are in charge of the regime there. And considering there's martial law in place, I can hardly imagine that military vessels would be passing to and fro. But we want the situation to get better. We are not standing in the way of the passage of the naval traffic. We've only helped them the last time this situation happened. Ural. There's a placard saying Ural. Good afternoon, Roman Zykov, Ural Television. Mr. President, pay attention to that and maybe adopt some measures so that the quality of pipes which deliver water to our citizens, our consumers, would be higher.
This has to do with technical regulations. You are right. We have to analyze what kind of pipes are supplied. I do agree, this problem does exist. But it's not only in relation to pipes or wastewaters, how to purify them. It's a large-scale issue which has to do with the whole country. And we've adopted certain solutions. It has to do with the industry. It has to do with shifting to state-of-the-art technologies in accordance with our legislation. We are also we can impose fines for when wastewaters are not purified. So it's a problem which has to be dealt with. As to the changing our constitution, well, it should be discussed by all Russian citizens. Russians are in danger. What kind of Russians are in danger? Last row. You've showed this placard. Hamzat Datukayev, Chechen Republic, Grozny. Thank you for paying attention to our rules. It's the 4th hour of our press conference, and you gave the floor only to those who are up front. Here we have Latin American guests, and they are shouting Latin America, but nobody pays attention to them. If it's possible to give the floor after me to them. Well, Vladimir Vladimirovich, I forgot my question. Then let's give the floor to Latin America. Russians are in danger. Why? Because thousands of our compatriots are in Syria, and their kids are there. It was not their will to go there, and parents have been punished because of that. They are sent to prison, and kids are growing up without parents. We know your position. But how to solve this problem in the future? And second short question. The first president of Chechnya, Ahmad Kadyrov, asked you to build or to rebuild airport in Grozny. It has been rebuilt, but the reconstruction has not been finished. And now the Republican authorities are discussing the second stage of its reconstruction with various ministries. How could you help this? We welcome thousands and thousands of tourists in Chechnya, and the capacity of the airport does not correspond to these numbers. And we have the main avenue, Putin's Avenue, and we are building Judo Palace, which will have the name of Vladimir Putin. You are supported widely in our region, and the Chechens do respect you a lot. And that's why I'd like, from Adygea or Karacháyevo-Cherkessia, my colleagues invited you there. If you go there, please come to us as well, to Chechnya. Thank you. You cannot come to you as well. One have to go there directly. I'll be there. I'll come to you. As to the kids, we are dealing with this problem. We have the program of returning kids to their motherland, to Chechnya, to Caucasus, and Ramzan Kadyrov is doing that, and we keep doing that. As to the airport, it is functioning, and it is functioning as international airport as well. If you need something else, well, Ramzan Akhmadovich will come to me and we will discuss what else is needed. I don't understand what else shall be done. It is working. The airport is working. But we will see. Thank you for your invitation. people's friendship over there. People's friendship.
Vladimir Vladimirovich, здравствуйте.
Good afternoon. I'm Valery Pavlichenko. I represent the first Russian national channel, TV channel. It has been created with the support of the National Relations Council, which functions under your auspices. As a follow-up of our Dagestan colleague, she mentioned multi-ethnic journalism. We are a young TV channel. We are telling about successes in the regions. We are talking about interethnic issues, and we need your assistance. We would like to be information partners in the implementation of national or policy. Could you assist us? We have Interethnic Council, Interethnic Relations Council under the auspices of the President. I will ask my colleagues to call you, to get in touch with you and to work with you. It's a very important area for us. Well, Happy New Year to all of you, but it's high time to finish our press conference. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for your questions. From my heart, I wish you success and a lot of happiness.
Только чашку забери.